go. Okay. We talked about zoning, good old public and private land use control. Zoning is an example of a public land use control. And a private land use control, who might put into place some sort of a private land use control? Who does those? Who does that? Yeah, there you go. HOAs, big time. Anybody live in an HOA? Anybody heard horror stories of living in an HOA? I hear people say, well, I will never live in an HOA. Then I hear other people say, well, I'll never not live in an HOA, depending on your particular story. If it was a case where you wanted to paint your door a certain color and they wouldn't let you, and then they picked on you about not putting your garbage can away quickly enough, you may not want to live there the next time around. But if it's a case where you had a neighbor that just wouldn't keep things nice and neat and tidy when you went to try to sell your house and it affected that whole thing, then maybe you kind of like having some higher authority that can keep people sort of in check within reason. And there's a lot of gray in between those extremes, right? And some do it better than others. And it's kind of scary to think the ultimate enforcement ability of an HOA, you don't pay those dues, is what? What can they do? Ultimately, worst case scenario. There it is. Foreclosure. Yeah, they are quite powerful. You betcha. So that's private land use controls. Another person, who else can put a private land use control in place in the form of a deed restriction? Anybody. For instance, whomever you're buying the property from. That seller could say, I'll sell you my property, but you have to follow these guidelines. You can only do this with it. And we're not even talking about fee simple defeasible, although that could be a thing too. Private land use control, deed restrictions could just be, you have to build this kind of house on it. If that's what, when you build a house, it's got to look like this. Or a minimum of acreage. Maybe they want to make sure everybody has plenty of room on that 10-acre parcel. So they're only going to allow 5 houses to be built on that land. 1 house per 2 acres to ensure that, because they're so tired of houses that are stacked on top of each other. You hear that phrase a lot. Those are private. The zoning ones are public. And when you see this sign, this yellow and blue sign with blue Z on it, that means something is being talked about down there at the county government building. The zoning department is going to have a hearing of some sort to discuss changing some things. The zoning in this area is one thing. They're going to talk about why they should change it to another thing. Probably because some developer wants to do something with it and they're asking for a zoning change. Or maybe it's because it's zoned maybe agricultural and the city wants to put a school in, so they need to change the zoning. It could be any number of things. Not a bad idea for you to experience one of those, kind of see what goes on in those things. You might even get lucky enough to join one online and not have to actually go down there. But, it's fun to go down there too sometimes. The thing about zoning, public land use controls, is it is indeed public. It's got to be for the public good. For the public good. If it's not for the good of the public, it's not complying with the regulations of zoning. That's what the zoning is there for, everybody. The benefit of everybody. One term that's definitely testable, that you have a great likelihood of seeing, is legal non-conforming use. The idea that someone is grandfathered in. They were there first, then the zoning changed. They are allowed to keep living there, keep doing what they're doing with it. But there are some limitations. The use of that property cannot be that legal non-conforming use forever. Eventually, something's going to fall apart, get torn down, and they can't rebuild to the same level as what they were before. They can't restore it if it's destroyed too much or damaged too much. They're grandfathered in, but they can't just add another wing, another floor. They can't use it in a way beyond what it's already currently being used as. So you're allowed to keep using it, but you're restricted in that way. A variance is another highly testable term. This is the case where you're allowed to deviate from the zoning because you have an undue hardship. And I think I gave you the example of perhaps an eminent domain situation resulting in the front setback lines being made less. It probably makes more sense to look at it. Go. There we go. So we have our street on the front here. We have a lot. Originally, the setback line at the front was, let's say, 40 feet back from the road. But because of eminent domain, the city, the state, the county, some government came along and chopped half the yard because they added a 4-lane road. They made a 4-lane instead of a 2-lane. Now what they have is a 20-foot setback, but those aren't allowed. But it's not their fault. It's not this owner's fault who lives here. So they have an undue hardship. It's not because of them that the situation exists. So they're allowed a variance. There are other examples of variances in your book. Special use allows the property to be used for a very special use that doesn't comply with the zoning regulations. Overlay districts, you could have a residential zoned area, and then overlaid on top of that is a historic zoning, which means, yes, you can live there. That's the residential, but now it's a historic district. All the houses are old. We want to keep that character and look of the old houses. Don't, over time, as things break, replace them with newish looking things. You've got to keep that older looking white picket fence. Keep that in repair. Don't try to put a chain link fence in there or a 6-foot privacy fence if that doesn't match the theme of the era, the historic era. Front door gets replaced. Don't put a all steel brand new front door from Lowe's. It needs to probably be made by someone custom to reflect the look of that historic time. That's the privilege of living in the historic district. That's why people do that, because they like that look. And that's just part of the rules. Aesthetic zoning, kind of similar. Got to keep things looking a certain way. I drove through Cary, North Carolina for a real estate class one time, and as I was driving, I needed to pop into like a CVS for something, snacks or something. And in the part of Cary I was in, I could not find one. It was a 4-lane road, but everywhere I looked left and right were these lovely patches of trees hiding whatever stores were behind them. I had to pull into every place or look on my GPS to try to find it. It wasn't like drive down the road and look, oh, there's a CVS. They had so much aesthetic zoning going on, requirements of foliage, how do you say that, foliage, that I couldn't even find anything, but it looked nice. So aesthetic zoning can go too far sometimes. And you see those cell towers disguised as trees, well, disguised as fake-looking trees. Spot zoning, illegal, highly testable question here. This is a case sort of like, oh, so-and-so is related to the person on the zoning board and they pushed this thing through so their uncle could use the property in a way he wanted to that doesn't match up the surrounding zoning use in which he's located. Benefits the owner, inconsistent with the public good. It's illegal. Spot zoning, not allowed. As a broker, it all comes back to that. That's what we're here for. How do we handle it as a broker? Well, what do we do when a customer has a question, client has a question about zoning or property use? Defer. Find it out from someone else. Don't give them an opinion. Even if you ran into the exact situation in your own personal real estate and you absolutely know the answer, don't be the authority. Don't present yourself as the authority. Say, let's talk to the zoning board and see, because everything's different. Every property is different. Even if you ran into the same kind of situation about spot zoning or non-conforming use, let's see how it matches and fits with their need, just to get it off of your shoulders. We talked about subdivisions are anytime a lot is or a property is divided even into just two, just dividing it in two has created a subdivision. And now subdivision rules, ordinances, regulations must be followed. Which ones? Whatever ones the city and county that the property is located in have dictated. They govern the rules. They create the rules of a subdivision. As a broker, you need to realize that when you take a buyer in to buy new construction, for instance, and they're in the preliminary stages, they've just laid out the plat map, the preliminary plat map, showing where all the lots are going to be in relation to the street and setback lines and all that fun stuff, that the developer is allowed to sell your client one of those lots with just a preliminary plat map. But they're not allowed to actually close on that sale. It's going to take a while for that property to be built. That house might take 4 to 6 months. Sometime between now and those 4 to 6 months of completion, when the certificate of occupancy is issued, better make sure that developer wants to be sure that the preliminary plan has become a final approved plan, recorded. Now they can close. Now your client can close. And that's, you're along for the ride too. You want to make sure those things are done. Here's our preliminary plat approval before creating a contract. You can go under contract with just preliminary, but you have to have a final before closing. And if we do it wrong, if the developer does this wrong, it can be a criminal act, closing on an unapproved subdivision. Streets are important too, another testable item, and in real life, very applicable when you help somebody, even definitely new construction, but even not new construction. That property on 27 acres I told you about, in fact, I told you about it related to the log cabin, and gosh, I forgot the example I was making, but a whole separate example. They had a driveway, and 100 feet down the road was a green street sign for a named street, but it was gravel. Turns out it was private, not public. I had to make a phone call, find out, is this publicly maintained or private? Because they used that bordered the other side of their property. And they used it to get to some pasture land in the back. The process of this conversion from private to public street needs to be built to DOT standards. Then petition the DOT, hey, would you please now take this over and maintain it so that our homeowners here don't have to? And then the DOT would have to actually say, yes, we will do so. If they petition the DOT to accept the streets as public, and they don't, then you're kind of in limbo. And a lot of times buried in a new construction contract, it says they are currently private, but we're going to convert them to public. That is the plan. We're building them to DOT standards. We're going to petition the DOT to accept them as public at some point before the project is done. And that may happen after your clients are in. Quite likely. Maybe even years after they're in. Just need to have full disclosure so they understand what that means. Worst case scenario, somehow it goes sideways and the DOT doesn't accept it. Well, now guess who's responsible for those streets? Your client and their neighbors. And that's not cheap to fill potholes and repave roads. We as brokers need to verify, discover, and disclose. That's overarching theme you will see recur over and over and over. And by the way, a little resource, nc1map.gov. If you're curious, just do that at some point in your spare time for fun because you have nothing else to do. Check your own street, see if it shows up as public or private. And if you're ever curious, give that one a check too. Building codes must be followed. Different jurisdictions have different building codes, local standards for construction. A local person, a local inspector, will come out and check the property along the way. You have the footings poured, the inspector needs to come make sure they were done right. You have the foundation built, inspector needs to give it their approval. Now the walls go up, inspector. Electrical wiring, inspector. Plumbing, inspector. You get the point. All the way to the end, because we want to make sure things don't shock people, kill people, drown people, crush people, right? That's probably a good thing. Now, it may be something that the city inspector, the building code inspector They're just enforcing the building code, right? That's not necessarily the same thing as if you go get Joe Blow home inspector out there. That person is concerned with building code, of course, but also more things. But the building code inspector is the one making sure the bare minimum as per the local standards for construction in terms of safety are followed. Ultimately, we're getting to the end here, the certificate of occupancy. That's the point at which someone can actually live there. And officially, you're supposed to have safety gear on if you walk through a place pre-CO, before the certificate of occupancy. And that's why you'll see sometimes people wear hard hats. They probably should all the time, but sometimes they actually require it. And you might, as a broker walking your client through, they might ask you to do that. And it's a safety thing, it's an insurance thing, but that certificate of occupancy, the CO, is the ultimate goal here. That's when the property can close and your client can live there. We left off with this concept of the Interstate Land Sale Full Disclosure Act, probably the longest name of a thing in this course. It's the idea of selling property outside of the state, across state lines. And if it's 25 or more lots that are offered for sale by a developer across state lines, they have to provide a property report to the purchasers. Full disclosure of the ins and outs of what's going on with this project. They also have to allow the purchaser to rescind the contract and back out within a certain amount of time. Yes, okay, you wanted to buy it, now you don't. Okay, I'm not going to hold you hostage to the purchase. You can back out. And if they don't follow the Disclosure Act, full Interstate Land Sales Full Disclosure Act, then they, the developer, are subject to criminal and civil problems. There are other land use restrictions. There are flood zones. That's a real applicable day-to-day thing that we have to deal with as brokers. When you list a property or when you help someone buy it, you need to discover and disclose the status of, is it in a floodplain? Jennifer, I don't have a time limit required to back out that you need to know. It probably depends upon different areas, but it's not something you'll be tested on. Other land use controls, flood zones, you can access the FEMA flood maps. FEMA flood maps, you can access those, Google it, and plug in an address and see, are you in a flood zone? Is the property in a flood zone? We'll talk about that when we get to insurance, the insurance chapter. Wetland restrictions, particularly like out in the coast where fresh water comes out into salt water. There's a very unique ecosystem where that happens. But anytime water is involved, there's habitat issues, animals that must be cared for, tended to in that, not caused to die. So there's wetland restrictions. There's highway access restrictions. In fact, at the end of my road that I live on, it dead ends into I-85. And it would be very convenient if I could knock down that guardrail and then just drive 30 feet down the road and whip on over into I-85 real quick, instead of having to take 5 minutes to go over to the nearest exit. Convenient, but probably stupid, unsafe, right? I can't just come on out onto the highway or interstate where I want to with a permanent kind of a driveway thing. There's highway access restrictions required. You have to get any driveway permit, but highway access restrictions fall under land use as well. Oh, my favorite topic. Who's an expert on septic? Anybody love the septic systems? Anybody familiar? Anybody live ever in a house that had a septic tank? Those septic dwellers, got a couple of them. Okay. Well, we don't live in the tank, but the tank is there serving a very important purpose. And the first time you
I was wondering about living in the tank.
The first time you have a transaction involving a septic tank, you will become an expert, and then you'll be good. What you need to know for the test can be very easily explained by a Facebook post I saw just yesterday. Another agent at a different firm posted about her brand new listing. And it was, in fact, a little log cabin looking house. I think maybe in Mount Pleasant. Yep. From my memory. And in the ad on Facebook, on the post that she wrote up, it said this and that and the other about the house. Owner is currently using it as 5 bedrooms. And I looked at the house picture and I thought, Mount Pleasant, 9 acres, 5 bedrooms? I don't think so. And I had many better things to do, but I couldn't help myself. I had to get nosy, and I looked up the MLS data sheet, and I clicked on the attachments, and she made it easy for me. I was even probably going to go so far as to email the health department. I know, just really for you guys. I was doing it for you guys to show you an example and find out, not turn her in necessarily, but to find out. And in fact, she made it easy. She posted the septic permit document on the MLS. And right there, in not so easy to find print, it said perks for a 3-bedroom home. What is this thing, perk? That means how much wastewater, not to get too graphic, can the soil absorb in a reasonable amount of time? We don't need to know what all those things are, only that a perk test involves a health department person coming to the property, digging a hole of some size. It might just be like a little 2-inch core hole in the ground, or it might actually involve a bucket, like a backhoe kind of size. There are different types of perk tests. And then there's water involved, and they see how long does it take this water to absorb into the ground. Because if somebody's living in a place and they flush the commode and water goes out there in the septic tank leach field, we want to make sure it goes down into the earth instead of just kind of sticks there near the top, because eventually that's going to fill up and it's going to be a swampy mess. It's got to perk, got to absorb the wastewater. How much wastewater does it need to be able to absorb? That's where the bedrooms come in. The perk test has nothing to do with number of bathrooms. That's a common misconception. It's an easy way to get confused. The idea is it perks for a 3-bedroom house. That means that in 3 bedrooms, there's possibly going to be 2 adults, full-grown adults per bedroom. That's the house full of 6 full-grown adults, because 3 bedrooms. However much wastewater they produce needs to be able to absorb into the soil in a reasonable amount of time so as not to pool on the surface and be disgusting and unsafe and unsanitary. So when it perks for a 4-bedroom house, the idea is how many adults could that support? 8. So by her advertising it as a 5-bedroom house, did I tell you that? In the post it said the owner's using it as a 5-bedroom. I couldn't help myself. I made a comment. I wrote a comment, y'all, on the Facebook post. I know if you'd have been sitting next to me, you would have said, no, just don't do that. But I was very nice. I just said 5 bedrooms or 3 bedrooms? ? That's all. I didn't say, I teach it and I know this and you did that. I didn't do any of that. I just kind of floated it out there as if perhaps I had a client that might want a 5 or a 3, and I was just confused.
I'm very proud of you.
Thank you. I held back. She did reply. She said, owner's using it as 5. It's permitted for 3. And I thought, okay, that's kind of close to the line, but I guess you'll be okay if anybody ever fusses about it. I wouldn't even go there though. If I were her broker, I would not let her put the word 5 in that description. And I bet Doug and Margie feel the same way. If I had to, yeah, okay, I'm seeing a head shake. Too much liability, because it's also not true. See, here's the thing. You have a lovely single level home with 3 bedrooms and a septic tank that supports it. It has a full finished basement, and that's the situation here. They finished it all out. They put 2 more bedrooms plus probably a kitchen and a game room down there. And you better believe that owner, after all that time and effort and expense, wants to brag about their 5-bedroom home. And they want you, the broker, to list it and tell everybody it's a 5, not a 3. But you have to explain to them, look, I'm limited by the requirements of the law. My limitation is how much does it perk for? How many bedrooms are perked for it? Yes, I can still say it perks. It is a 3-bedroom home, but it's got these rooms in the basement. You just can't call them bedrooms. And you certainly can't say it's a 5-bedroom. How could they call it a 5-bedroom home properly and legally? In what way could they put you as the broker in a position to be able to legally, without getting in trouble, tell the whole world this is in fact a 5-bedroom home. Any guesses? It involves the fact that this is a septic tank sewage disposal system. How about if the city sewer lines extend out to this property? They're at the street. The owner just doesn't want to tap onto them because that requires paying to tap onto them. And it's not cheap. It's probably the same cost as a new septic system. It might be $3,000, $4,000, $5,000, $7,000 to tap onto the city system, and they have a perfectly fine working septic system. But if they're just adamant on calling it a 5-bedroom home, you could say, well, the only way that you can legally, and I can legally call it a 5-bedroom home is if you're on the city sewer system, because then the septic system doesn't matter. What it perks for is a non-issue. If it's city sewer lines that carry away that wastewater, instead of it sitting in a tank absorbing into the ground. Does that make sense? Septic, it gets a little tricky, and they do it wrong all the time, as we saw from this example. Health department is involved. Yeah, you could certainly do that. That'd be a great idea. Jennifer says, can you give the option to hook to the city in the listing? If that were the case, and I did that for a listing, it was closer into the city. They were still on a septic. And in fact, they had put in an in-ground pool, and that had destroyed some of the leach fields. So it wasn't quite properly sized for the 4-bedroom house. And so in response to that, before we put it on the market, we had a game plan, and we said, okay, let's just put it in the description. Tell them, look, it currently is set up for a 4-bedroom house, but it's got some things wrong with it. It probably has a couple $1,000s worth of repairs needed, even though they haven't had any trouble when they flushed the toilet. But here's how much it costs to tap onto the city system, whole world. And the sellers are willing to do either one. They'll either give you a credit for fixing the system that's there, the septic, or they'll give you the money to put toward tapping onto the city system. So you can get creative. So it's soil suitability, absorbability based on number of bedrooms. It is a material fact, absolutely. And the local health department is who you would contact to find out, hey, please send me the septic permit for this house. And they will. Even you could call just a random average citizen. Just give them a call, find out. It's none of your business, but you could call on your neighbor and say, hey, let me see the septic permit. Call the septic or the health department, and they'll send it to you. They'll probably email it to you. The thing about it, it's kind of funny. Every septic permit I've seen is just one page, and it's got all this lines of data about the house, sort of looks like a tax record. And somewhere it's scrawled out the picture of the lot, and it shows the house, and it shows things like this, like a line going to a tank. That's supposed to be a septic tank, and they'll label it, and they'll show how those leach fields, they might be 100 feet long, and it's that black corrugated pipe. Might be 4 of them. It doesn't necessarily correspond to the number of bedrooms. It's not like 4 pipes, 4 bedrooms or anything. That's beyond the scope of what we as brokers or you as a student in this class need to know. The septic specialist, the installation person, will determine how many, the inspector will determine how much leach field is needed. And so when the stuff gets flushed and ends up in this tank, there's some holes about halfway up the tank, and water carries out the liquidy stuff into these leach fields, and that's where it kind of dissipates. And eventually, over time, that tank is going to get full of the stuff that's not as liquidy. Is it breakfast time yet? So that's how septic tanks work in a 2-minute explanation. And when you're on a first transaction where somebody needs to have an inspection done, I want to have the septic tank inspected, and you as a broker need to always be on the record as suggesting that. Hey, buyer client, you should have the septic tank inspected. I don't want to. Okay, sign here. But they should. And if they do, go there. Go there and watch. And bring your nose plugs maybe. But they'll need to find this little manhole cover, person hole cover looking thing. They might have to dig down. Mine, I'm on a septic tank still. And I have city sewer at the street, but I have not tapped on. They had to dig down about 2-3 feet to find that lid. That's a great suggestion. Wisdom from the street from Mr. Doug Terry. Ask the seller when it was last cleaned and serviced, for sure. Yeah. So they'll dig down, they'll open this thing up, they'll look in there, and they will get a huge truck and a vacuum hose and clean out what's in there and make it nice and empty. Covenants and restrictions, we talked about that. The developer establishes those to maintain a certain look, structural style, landscaping look, maybe a certain requirement of trees and shrubs are in place. You've got to keep a certain amount. Storage sheds, it might be a rule that all storage sheds that are put in have to match the house or be made of a similar material, something along those lines, or be out of sight. It might be that if this is the entire lot, well, let's make it this way. Here's the house, here's the lot. It might be that the fence can only come up to the back corner of the house. It can't come all the way up to the front corner because they want to maintain a certain look. You just name it. There's all kinds of rules and regulations you could see in covenants and restrictions. As a broker, you're helping a buyer. You're going to call that listing agent, or you're going to look on the MLS and try to find the covenants and restrictions. You're going to say, could you provide the covenants and restrictions for this neighborhood? Because you want your buyer to be able to see all the rules that they're going to have to live by before they make a commitment to buying it.
That's just on the HOA, right?
HOA, sure. That's right. That's right. And these covenants and restrictions are established to maintain the qualities. I've seen fence requirements. I've seen 6-foot fence or smaller, but then somebody wanted to put an 8 or a 10-foot fence, and they're not allowed. Don't go ahead and do the fence and hopefully ask for forgiveness rather than ask for permission. That doesn't quite fly. You might end up fencing your yard to comply with the rules. They don't play around, and foreclosure can certainly happen. Real estate law on our shoulders as brokers: discover and disclose. Oh, that's a big one. Doug says if the buyer wants to run a small business out of their home, need to find out if it's allowed. The covenants and restrictions will say, can you even run a business out of your home? When I was thinking about getting in real estate, fresh out of college, one of the family friends I talked to, she ran her own real estate business out of her home. And I drove to her house to talk to her about it. She said, don't get into it, by the way. But as a 23-year-old, they say, don't do it. You do it. And I parked in her driveway. I went in her house in 1995. And on the left side was what used to be, the typical living room. On the right side was the formal dining room. The living room in your grandma's house with the plastic on the white furniture. You're not allowed to go in there. She had converted that to an office. And that was her real estate office. Now, hopefully, and this is indeed the case because now I know, because I know that neighborhood from a realtor perspective, that particular neighborhood has no HOA at all. No covenants and restrictions either, but they're not connected, by the way. Just because it has no HOA doesn't mean it has no covenants and restrictions. So as a broker, you need to make sure the status of both. Does this have an HOA? No. Okay, but does it have covenants and restrictions? Yes. I'll send them to you. And so the thing about working a business from your home is customers parking in your driveway and on the street. That can affect the other neighbors. That's why it's even a matter of consideration. Or maybe it's a dog boarding facility with kennels in the backyard and lots of barking. It could be that the buyer wants to do a business and you find out, yeah, it's okay to do a business. And then you just roll with it. You close, find out that the business they want to do is on a short list of businesses that you're not allowed to do there, like the dog kennel, because of noise, because the neighbors being bothered. So you got to discover and disclose. Look for potential restrictions. That's why, as a brand new agent especially, a good BIC is important, because they're really guiding you through all of these landmines. You can see how you could get in trouble with, you're doing your best, but still there's a lot of moving parts involved in a typical transaction. If there's a conflict between public and private restrictions, which one takes precedence? Which one do you have to follow? The state one or the local one, for instance? The zoning public one or the HOA private one? If there's a this or that, There it is. Across the board in this course, you'll find out, and you'll see that this is the case. It's the stricter one wins. We'll see that again in fair housing laws. The federal fair housing exemptions are surprisingly lax in one area. I'll just kind of float that out there and let that be a cliffhanger. But the state one of North Carolina is more strict, good in a good way. And it's the North Carolina one that we have to follow because we live here. So just like that, doesn't matter if it's public or private or state or local, the stricter one wins. You have to follow the stricter one. You betcha. This, as Margie mentions, you don't know what you don't know. You know, she's been in it longer than the rest of us. I've been in it 26 years, and there are still things that pop up. You can't know everything. That's why it's good to have resources. You know, that's why it's always good to have somebody to, and it's okay not to know everything. Just don't lie and say that you do. I admit that I don't all the time, and I'll say, oh, that's a great question. I don't know. Let me find out. I do know how to find out. That's all you need to know. How to get the answer without committing the liability yourself of claiming to know something that you don't. How are we doing? Good, because we're finished with 6. Let's get into the star of the day. We'll talk about agency. There we are. Oh, agency. In your textbook, should be page 133. The level 1 information that we'll be dealing with, and this is an all-day topic, guys. We'll be in this all day. Implied agency. We're going to talk about the definition of that. Spoiler alert, not allowed. Implied. You have to be express. You have to tell them how this is going to work. This is who represents who. Don't just leave it up to them to figure it out based on your behavior. Because you'll see that back in mid-90s, somebody got sued over that, and it led to a whole complete shift in the industry. I'll tell you more in 5 minutes. Unfair or Deceptive Trade Practices Act. We'll talk about that. And lead-based paint. There are a lot of disclosures in this business. Lead-based paint is a daily one. We deal with it all the time. We'll talk about the date requirement for lead-based paint disclosure. Application is our level 2 information. That's basic agency terms. Fiduciary is an important word in this business. Classification of the agency relationships. How are we offering our services to people in what various ways? Scope of the agent's authority. What is it that we can do? Can we sign a contract on their behalf? Maybe, probably not, but there is a case where you could. Probably a bad idea. We'll talk more about it. Here's an example of what you might see as a test question. William needs to be away from his business for a month. He authorizes an agent to conduct the operations of one of his business enterprises while he's away. What type of agency has he established? So this has nothing to do with real estate. So we're talking about the general definitions of this concept of agency. So we'll learn exactly what these kinds of agency are, but let me tell you real quickly what they are and then see if you can answer it. Special agency is when you carry out a specific list of tasks for someone. It gives you the least amount of authority over their life. So special is down here. Special agency is down here. General agency lets you do a little more for them. Now you can actually sign certain things on their behalf. The ultimate one is universal agency. That's the level of what an attorney could do. Or if you choose to give someone a power of attorney on their behalf, their own behalf, maybe they are going to be out of town. Maybe they are mentally unfit and they know this in a moment of clarity. So they sign over their authority to you. Now you can sign for them. Now you can choose to put them in a home or take care of them in some way because they no longer can make those choices dependably. So special is the least amount of responsibility that we have for someone's behalf. general is a little more, universal is the most. In light of that, if William needs to be away from his business for a month, authorizes an agent, the type of agency he has established would be what? What would you want to give someone authority to do? Do they need, how much authority do they need? You'd give them general. Yeah, limited is one of those examples where they threw an extra word in. When you see this kind of question, you're going to think, oh, the only three kinds of agency in this type of question is special, general, and universal. They just kind of threw limited in because it sounds official. As a business, somebody needs to be able to do quite a bit. So I'd say at least general, if not universal. But if the business could be done with an amount of responsibility, giving them an amount of responsibility that's general, I'd go with the least I could possibly get away with, right? But it's probably not going to be sufficient to just give them special. This is just sort of a point to get into what these terms mean. Let's look at one that's a little more applicable to our business. When a broker enters into a listing agreement, the broker has agreed to accept which of the following? You've been hired to sell their house. Which of the following are you agreeing to take care of for them? Fiduciary and contractual obligations with the client, fiduciary relationships with the client and customer, contractual obligations with cooperating brokers, and fiduciary obligations with the customer. Any idea here? We haven't learned the words yet, so it might be challenging, but fiduciary means you're taking care of the client. So in a listing agreement, they are hiring you. You're not making contractual decisions on their behalf. So it's a fiduciary thing. And the D wouldn't work because if they're hiring you to list their home, they are not considered a customer. They're considered a client. We'll talk more about these terms and they'll make more sense. B is probably the best answer here. Fiduciary relationships with client and customer. Contractual means you can sign contracts for them, and that in a listing agreement doesn't give you authority to sign contracts on their behalf. Okay. Why do they use us? Why do clients, consumers seek out an agent? We do lots of things. We as brokers, we handle listings for them. We also are resources for the other things, the ancillary parts of this business. We're a good resource to give them as far as a good loan officer many times. And in fact, your broker, you as a broker, you're going to hope that they do choose the one you suggested because you know that that person knows what they're doing. Sometimes they come to you and say, I'm going to use this lender. And you're like, oh no. Are you sure? You might say, you know what? I respect that. I'm glad that you have that relationship. I have other options if you need them. And oh, by the way, we do need to get a pre-approval letter to go along with our offer. And I don't know about your lender because I've never worked with them, but I do know the ones I can recommend do a great job. They're quick. They can get those letters quickly, and they're responsive because it's way more important to pick well in the beginning, just like anything, because halfway through the transaction, you don't want to find out that you've been put on the back burner and now you're too far in to bail and go to a different lender. Same thing with inspectors. Make sure you get good inspectors. We recommend things like inspectors. We don't really recommend title insurance. That's something the closing attorney deals with. And sometimes they'll ask if the seller, could you send your title policy? And we'll just piggyback onto that because it saves some time and expense to do the title search if they tag onto the one that was already done. But we as brokers, as I find my cursor, oh, where did that thing go? Here we go. handle things like listings, purchases, price negotiations, and then the rest of it is our network, which is valuable. Develop that from day one. That's something you can do even before you have clients. I promise you, a lender is going to ask you to take you to lunch, or is going to bring you something to the office, is going to want to at least have a phone call and tell you about the programs they offer. Take them up on it. Find out who's good. Ask around, find out, did you ever use this person for your clients? Make a list, lenders, inspectors, and as appraisals happen, once you have listings under contract, go meet the appraiser at your house, at your listing. And I'll tell you how to handle that later. There's a right way and a wrong way. But get the contact info, meet people, find resources, because if the next time you're having to do a listing presentation in that neighborhood and you're trying to figure out how much that house is worth, it might be nice to know an appraiser that has a really good feel for what values are like in that neighborhood. Because the house that you sold in there before had a two-car garage. The one that's asking you to come possibly list theirs has a 4-car garage. How much is a garage worth? That's good to ask around, find out from professionals who do it all the time, i.e. appraisers, what they would do. What kind of adjustments would they make? Okay, from the beginning, think of the Leave It to Beaver era, the good old black and white TV era, the 50s. Real estate was done a little differently. In the 50s, the only kind of representation that existed was sellers' representation. Buyers had nobody. Sure, agents would help buyers, but legally, that agent was not required to look out for that buyer. Seller hired an agent to sell their house. If the buyer wanted to see the house, they would call the name and number on the sign, or maybe in the paper. They might run a classified ad. And the buyer would call that listing agent directly. And that listing agent would say, sure, I'll show you the house. Be glad to. Now, hopefully that agent did a good job of explaining to the buyer, look, fair warning here. Don't tell me anything that you don't want the seller to know, because I am their agent and I'm required to tell them whatever I've learned from you. So as I'm showing you this listing, don't tell me that this is just like the one you grew up in and you'd pay any price to get it. You just love it. In fact, don't even tell me how much you love it. You and I both know there's no way the vast majority of agents ever did that, right? Because they're there to protect and get the most money for their seller's house. And oops, if that buyer happens to just display a little too much affection for this house, I am going to keep my mouth shut and just kind of egg it on and be like, oh, do you like this one? Oh, okay, interesting. And then you're going to go back and tell your seller, oh my gosh, they were in love with it. I know they're coming in with an offer, like 15,000 below asking, but I could tell that gleam in their eye. Let's go back strong. Let's maybe stick to your asking price. You better believe that's what happened. They had no legal obligation or ability, didn't exist to protect buyers. Buyer agency did not exist for another 40 plus years. 40 plus years, that means mid-1990s. That seems way late in the game to me, does it not to you? So in the 50s, that was it. You wanted to see a house, you just chased after all the listing agents. You'd go into a real estate office as a consumer and you'd say, I want to buy a house. And they'd say, here's what I have, these 11 listings. And you'd say, what else is out there? And they'd say, I don't know. This is what I have. If you want to know what else is out there, there's another firm down the street. And they'd have to go firm to firm, agent to agent, listing by listing. Not very efficient at all. Doesn't that just grate against our intuition of this day and age, Googling everything and sitting in this chair you're in right now and finding out everything you need to know? That was not that. That was not this or something. You know how I'm trying to say it. That was the 50s, guys. There was no representation for the buyer. But I have a feeling that a good agent who did better than the other agents probably made that buyer feel like they were looking out for them. Right? That's what I would do back then. I would, you're not going to, attract more flies with honey than vinegar, right? I would want to make sure I'm going to take care of my seller first and foremost, but I'm not going to be mean to the buyer. I'm not going to be combative. I'm going to make them feel comfortable, sort of like when you go into a new construction, new homes community today, that on-site sales rep is not the buyer's agent. They're working for the builder. They have the name of the builder on their shirt, but yet they're really good at building rapport really fast. You ever notice that? I would say, here's a field trip homework exercise. Next time you drive past new construction and it says model home, go in. Just go in, look around, talk to them. You can be straightforward. Say, look, I'm in the class. I'm hoping to get into the business. They'll give you a card. They'll be nice to you. And maybe if you're lucky, hang around while another actual buyer comes in and see how they act. Watch how they talk to them. You can learn a lot. Even when you're in the business with the license, go visit those. You learn a lot about, because guess what? Their way of doing business is different than ours. It has to be. They have a small window of opportunity to win the buyer over in that model home, just like a car lot salesperson. Similar. They've got to bring it all out quick and win you over fast, because the minute you go off the lot, go out of the house, the model house, their chances of you coming back diminish greatly. We in the general brokerage, we're going to buddy up with them and help them no matter what they buy, whether it's this new construction or that one or the resale down the street. So we can kind of relax a little more. We do need to win out over the other possible buyer agents they choose, but not the same as an on-site agent. So in the 50s, there was no buyer representation. In the 60s, there was still no buyer representation, but there was a significant improvement, because now, instead of having to go office to office, there was the MLS. There was a big database that you could use to find out what is for sale. And that was the start of it. Members of the MLS, as agents, we choose to subscribe to it. If we want to list a house and put it in the MLS, we have to pay money to subscribe to it, even now. So agent members have access to each other's listings. That's the biggest draw. Top 2 good reasons for MLS participation: putting your listing out there, because everybody knows more buyers than just you. And then number 2, having access to the sales data after the fact, knowing what it sold for, and being able to do a quick search to see what something sold for in this particular neighborhood, similar properties kind of thing. So this MLS thing allowed a buyer to not have to scramble around going to different offices. They find one good agent they run into that they like, and that agent's going to say, well, here's my listings, my 11 listings, but I can also help you with the 20 listings down the street. Any listing out there in the MLS, I can help you with. But what they probably didn't say too loudly is, I'm still not representing you because buyer agency still doesn't exist. I have access to all the listings, but my legal obligation of loyalty is to the seller still. Pause as that sinks in. Think about that. What if you're a buyer in 1960, you find a great agent that's very personable, wants to take you around showing you some things, and you just can't help but like her. She's great. Are you going to be tempted to relax your guard eventually, maybe on house number 5? You're stressed about the move. You're going to let down your guard a little bit and tell them how much you really like this one. And gosh, I really hope I get this one. Yeah, probably. Also, if they didn't do a great job of explaining the legalities, which I can't imagine they did, because they probably didn't even think there was a need to, because there was only one choice. It's not like, here are your multiple choices. That was the only way it was done. We'll talk more about this when we come back from break. Let's come back at 10:08.
Neal, did I miss much in the first 30 minutes?
It was mostly recap. It was a lot of zoning review, and then we finished up chapter 6.
Okay.
But it's recording.
I did have a question on
Yeah.
Notion,
Okay.
and that was the difference between listing agent versus Listing versus seller.
Right.
I just always thought that was the same.
Let me look at it. Is there more to it than that? Let's see. Here we go. Yeah, definitely not stupid question. All of this stuff is just weird in this industry. What's the difference between a listing agent and a selling agent? Oh boy, that's in fact a marvelous question. And I'm going to handle that. I'll tell you now, but I'm going to definitely remind me if I don't remember to handle it as soon as we come back.
Okay.
The word is so important. Oh my gosh, this can really mess you up. The word selling, I'll just tell you, here's the answer. Always means agent helping buyer. And there's no logic to it. There's no way to just think, yeah, that makes sense because, and that's how I'll remember it. Selling agent is the one on the buyer's side. You could argue that, well, the selling agent is the one helping the seller sell and they're selling. And that, well, I know, but you just have to cement this in your head. The word selling means buyer. Sellers means seller side. So seller's agent is the same as saying listing agent. That is more of an equal type of term. Okay, this word selling agent. If you see the word selling ending in ing, that means it's the agent helping the buyer. It's the one on the buyer's side. We'll get into later the explanation further. Just because they're on the buyer's side, though, doesn't mean they're the buyer's agent. Bear with me. It'll make more sense in a minute. But just know the word selling means it's the agent on the buyer's side. In whatever way they're helping them, that's who they're helping. If it's the one helping on the seller's side, helping the seller, it's either going to be called the listing agent or the seller's agent. Seller's possessive. Not selling. Don't let selling ever in your mind make you think, oh, seller side. No, it is the buyer's side. Selling is the buyer's side. Selling is the buyer's side. Say it after me. Unmute and say it after me. Selling agent is on the buyer's side.
Seller
Is on
Agents on the buyer's side.
side.
That's how important it is. I never make you do that. Selling is on the buyer's side.
Buyer's side.
Yes. Sellers is on the seller's side, which might be
Right.
a good way to remember that because it's literally the same three letters. Sellers apostrophe S is on the seller's plural type of word side. Sellers. Selling is on the buyer's side. It'll make more sense later. Hang in there. There we are. Okay. So the 60s, we left off with the 60s. The MLS came about. So nice. The MLS in the 60s was still quite a bit different than the MLS now. I got in the business in 1996, and there were still these weird artifacts laying around. They were twice the size of this thing, whatever your textbook looks like. They were double that, and they were the MLS. It was a book. It was a printed book every month. And oh, wait a minute. What about people who list their houses more frequently than every month? There was a supplement. There were books and supplemental pages. There we go. So the MLS was a book, and there were some of them laying around at the office when I got in it. Not for very long, because people stopped doing it. They made the full commitment to the online version, thank goodness. But you had to flip pages in that book to see what was available. You had to flip pages through that book in another section to see what things had sold for, to do your analysis for what a property might sell for based on what did sell. So the MLS at least gave the benefit of working with a single one agent, not having to talk and explain your story to a million different agents and looking for listings by all these different ones. But the point we left off with is our next point here. Have a feeling that those consumers working with those agents were not told properly, don't tell me anything. Don't fall in love with me, kid. Don't tell me just any and everything because I'm obligated and you better believe I will. Tell my client it's not you. My client is the seller. Yes, I'm being helpful to you, but my client is the seller. Looking out for them. Now, part of belonging to the MLS is the benefit of putting your listings out there for other people to sell. How do those other agents, and how do you know when it's not your listing how much you're going to make if you bring your buyer to buy that property? It's disclosed on the sheet. There's not a requirement. By the way, okay, I'm going to get you. I bet I'll get at least one of you. What's the standard rate of commission? Tell me in the chat. What's the standard rate of commission when you sell a house? This is the last time in your life that you get to say this. This is the last time ever that your answer is a number. When the question presented to you is, what is the standard rate of commission? Your answer from here forward, especially once you get that license, is depends. It's negotiable. There is no standard. If we say that there's a standard rate of commission, we have broken the law. It's the Sherman Antitrust Act. We have committed an infraction. We've implied that there is a standard and there's not. We've implied that everybody charges the same thing and they don't. We've implied that the consumer has no choices, but they do. We just can't say it. We as brokers, and they do it all the time. Brokers do it all the time. You see in Facebook groups, people will say, what's the standard? And somebody will chime in, 6. Wrong. Don't say it. You can get in trouble for that. Big time. Don't even imply it. Don't even kind of ink toward it. Oh, it's kind of everybody. Just say it's always negotiable. Now, you can say, I charge 6. You can also say, my firm requires that I charge 6 or 5 or 4. You can say, here's what I charge, but as to everyone else, I don't know. I just know what I'm worth. How do you like that one? Put that one in your pocket. I know what I do for the money, and here it is. And then get on, because it doesn't matter, does it? You just need to be concerned with explaining to them your value, and they'll figure out if they think you're worth it or not, depending on how good of a job you do with that. But in terms of just answering that question wrong, that'll get you both on the test and in real life. Yeah. I see it wrong all the time. There is no standard. It is negotiable. Heck, I charge a full service commission usually, but sometimes I don't, because not all situations are the same. What if it's somebody, an investor, and they want to eventually list 10 properties with me, and I believe it, and it's true? I might be willing to do all of those for a little bit less because the whole is greater than the sum of the, right? How about I'm willing to wiggle around, and I don't have a higher authority firm to answer to. But if my firm said, oh, we don't negotiate here. If you want to negotiate, you need to go to another firm. If you do want to negotiate, then you're going to take a split based on the smaller amount you negotiated. We're going to get our full amount. So sometimes, first and foremost, what does the firm allow? But you can't say there is a standard. The agent represented the seller back in the 60s, even though you had the privilege of working with just one agent, but the buyer just didn't know it all the way up until the mid-90s. I'm going to make sure everybody's muted until you have a question. Please unmute at that point, but we'll keep you muted until then. In the mid-90s, or in the early 90s, a firm called Edina Realty had a client. The agent showed lots of homes, worked for this buyer. The buyer assumed that agent was representing their own needs, their own best interests. But when they found out that they, in fact, were not, that they were not even able to legally, they got mad and they sued the realty firm. And it was eventually settled. And in 1995, Edina Realty settled 3 lawsuits about this issue, $19.5 million in the settlement. And that changed the industry. Because everybody else said, well, we don't want to live that life. Buyer sued the firm. Buyer won the suit. Settlement happened. And the issue is this. Let's make sure the people know who we are representing. this was a major shift, and I got in the business 1 year after it became brand new. Now, I told you last week to take pride in the fact that you're new in the business because you know the laws and rules better than everybody else. So back then, I didn't know any better. I learned buyer agency and this thing called dual agency because I had just taken the class in 1996. So when I got in the business, there were a lot of old timers at the time who were kind of frustrated at this new law, these new rules. Because up until then, think about it, they didn't have to talk about agency. There was only one kind, and they probably didn't. It was pretty lax. But all of a sudden now they have to stop everything at a certain point called first substantial contact. First substantial contact. They have to stop the conversation and say, hey, wait a minute, guys, before we go further, before you tell me anything about your money situation or your motivation for buying or selling, let me explain how I work. Let me explain who's representing who. Right now, I am not your agent because you haven't decided to hire me yet. We haven't decided to work together yet. Therefore, just in case we don't decide to work together, don't tell me anything as much as you might love me because I'm pretty darn likable, right? We're in this business because we're pretty easily likable. We build rapport pretty easily. So don't let them hurt themselves by telling you something that you end up having to disclose to the other party until it's firmed up, till they've actually hired you. They shouldn't tell you how bad they want that house or tell you how bad they need to sell the house and therefore how much lower than asking price they would be willing to take. Be careful. Go ahead, Margie. You're muted, sweetheart. Muted. Can't hear you. There it is.
Sorry. I just wanted to say, is there an echo with you?
We're good. I think we're good.
We're good? Okay. I started in 1970, and buyers assumed if they were in your car, you represented them. And unfortunately, everybody took advantage of that. All right. Now, one of the things I want to tell you, when Neal says agency is about who represents who, if you haven't written that down, write that down. In all of your test questions, later on in all of your transactions, that's the question you have to ask yourself. Who is representing who? And that will help you clarify many things. Thanks, Neal.
That was great. Perfect. Her point is, it makes me think of this example. What if anybody gone to a car lot, go to that car lot where we were in our own car. We're like, oh boy, I want to go look at that car over there, but I know that little cluster of people smoking are going to start honing in. One of them's going to break from the pack and come over within a minute. And we're all like, okay, my curiosity about this car is worth more than my annoyance at that guy coming to talk to me, right? So eventually you get out and you go over and you deal with it. And they come over and they're like, oh, blah, blah, blah. And they do. What if this time he was really nice? They're often really nice. But you give them your contact info so that you can do the test drive and you go home. What if 2 days later he calls you and he says, not, hey, you want to buy that car you drove? But he says, you know what? I was doing some work for you. I looked up all the cars like that one at all the other dealers and found this top 10 list of the best ones. And, you know, if you have some time today, I'll come pick you up and I'll drive you around to all of those dealers and show you all of those cars. Would you feel like that person was looking out for you? Who would otherwise take all that time and effort, right? That's kind of what we're talking about here. Back then, that's how they behaved. That's how Margie and the gang, I'm sure she did it right. But that's how the bad ones back then behaved. They did all of those things. They acted like buyer's agents, but legally they weren't. They were going to get paid. But if a buyer along the way told them, I would do anything to get this house. I have a feeling that some of them did not convey that information to the seller. Why would you and expect to have a relationship with that person ongoing? They're going to get mad at you and fire you, right? You would act like a buyer agent without actually being one, and that's how it worked. Well, finally, the lawsuit caught up with them. Some buyer said, oh, I don't like it, and they sued over it. And then as of 1995, in this market I got in 1996, now there's more than just seller's agency. Looks like this. There is buyer's agency, and there is sellers, not ing, but seller's agency. And an agent can be right here helping the buyer, or they could be right here helping the seller, or they could be right here in the role of what's called dual agency. That's what came about. It wasn't as simple back then as saying, okay, now let's add buyer agency to the mix. Now sellers can have one and buyers can have one. Done. Easy. What's the problem? Okay, sounds great. But what if a buyer potential client calls on the yard sign and it's your listing and you answer and they say, hey, I'm curious about your house, 123 ABC Street. What can you tell me? And you tell them some stuff and you end up meeting them out there and you show them the property and they say, I want to buy it. And you're like, okay, well, tell your agent to bring me an offer. I don't have an agent. Oh, you don't have your own buyer's agent? No. Why don't you just do it? That's what dual agency could be about. That's what that's about. And you still have some options. You are not required to be a dual agent in that moment, but that is one of the choices. It all goes back to disclosure. I'm going to get into that more specifically in just a second. So to recap, the 50s, one-person offices. You had to go from office to see all the different listings. Very inefficient, very annoying. In the 60s, we came up with MLS sharing of information. You could find one agent you liked, and they could take you around. You could look at a bunch of stuff and have access to everything in the database through them, that one person. However, they had no legal obligation to help you as a buyer. Wasn't even allowed, wasn't even acknowledged. It wasn't a thing that existed, but they probably acted like it anyway. Fast forward to 1995, major lawsuit brought about in one fell swoop, buyer agency and dual agency. So what these old timers in 1995 and 96, when I got in it, were frustrated about is, think about that. Before 1995, you met a new prospective client, you could get right on into the business of making them like you, winning them over, meeting them at the coffee house, talking about their kids and their pets and their dreams and desires and just flow on with it. And, oh, that sounds great. You know, I have 3 kids and I have that kind of dog and blah, blah, blah. Oh, what houses you looking to? And, oh, here's some houses. All about the rapport straight on into the business. Post 1995, here's how it looked. Oh, want to talk about buying? Let's meet at the coffee shop. Oh, blah, blah, blah. Oh, kids, dogs, whatever. You know, agent that I just met, I was pre-approved yesterday for $350,000. Okay, wait a second. Before you go forward, sir, we need to talk about something very specific. I need to let you know that right now I'm not representing you. I hope to be. I hope we worked well together. I think we'll work well together. I hope we decide to work together. Maybe today, this very day. But at this moment, as we're talking about your wishes and goals, I'm obligated by the Real Estate Commission to disclose to you how agents work with consumers. In fact, there's a sheet for that. There is a form for that. It's called the Working with Agents Disclosure. The Working with Agents Disclosure. In your book, it'll say the Working with Agents brochure. But, you know, they don't print those books every year. There's a couple of years, maybe got a couple years of age on it. And we've changed it just this past year. It's not a brochure anymore. The actual disclosure is a single page when you're talking to buyers that they would sign, where you explain how you work with buyers. And then there's a single page just for sellers. It's better. I think it's more efficient. It's more straightforward. The brochure still exists, but it's now been turned into what's called a Q&A. Here's how agency works, a questions and answers on working with agents. So that's kind of the documentation. We'll see little excerpts of that in a moment. But that's what you have to do now. Back when I was brand new, there was an agent in my office. Margie might have remembered the name. Bill Latham was part-time commercial, but he did a lot of residential, and he had a team when teams really weren't a thing. He was very direct, very dry-witted, and I was terrified because the first time I shook his hand, he said, "Ugh, your hand is wet." And I was already nervous about even being there. But he turned out to be a great guy, as intimidating as he could be. When he was told, this is now how you have to explain this, he did it in a bit of a unique way. He would bring the client back to the office conference room, sit him in there. He'd say, "Can I get you something to drink?" And they'd, of course, say yes. And he'd go get him the water. And then at the time, it was a brochure, a little trifold, black and purple covered brochure. And he would safety pin it to his necktie. And he'd come back in to the conference room with the water, and he'd just start talking to him. "Oh, so you like this?" And they'd be looking. And eventually he would say, "Oh, this. Well, you see, guys, until we talk about this, we can't really do anything else." So, you can put your flavor on it. You can put your spin on it, but he embraced it. Some agents just grumbled about it because he knew, look, I've got to very carefully handle these clients, these potential clients, before they actually hire me and become my clients. They need to know, who do I represent right now? Don't tell me that you would pay anything for that listing if it turns out we don't decide to work together, because now I'm obligated to tell that seller that you would pay anything for that listing, especially if it's my listing. See it? That makes sense? It's tricky. It's precarious. So there are two. See, I'll give you a little spoiler. We are not quite there yet, but there are two topics of conversation that trigger you talking about this working with agents disclosure. Two topics: money. What can you afford, or what kind of cash do you have? Like hard and fast, real terms about money, and your motivation. How bad do you want it? How bad do you need to sell? If you were to say, "I got a pre-approval for a max of $400,000. Yes. They just talked about money. You need to stop everything and tell them how agency works, if you haven't already. If they were to say, "Well, my company is going to buy me out. I've got to move by November." Have to. Words like have to. Yes, they just told you a motivation thing. But if they were to say, "I'd kind of like to get a house somewhere around 300. Kind of like to, prefer, wish," that does not trigger it. That does not trigger money. That's kind of just preferences, not absolutes. And if they said, "It'd be nice to move in the summer when the kids are out of school," that does not trigger it. Money and motivation, M and M is how you can remember that. That is what triggers this phrase called first substantial contact. First substantial contact. At what point do you have to talk to them about the working with agents disclosure? At first substantial contact. What is that? It's money or motivation. It's when the topics of conversation have turned to money or motivation as a hard and fast real thing. "I have $500,000 for my grandma to spend." Oh, well, before we go forward, let me explain how this thing works. I would love to work with you, but you haven't hired me yet. Hopefully we'll decide to work together. At that point, you can tell me anything, and then I am required to protect it and keep it confidential. But right now, we haven't got there yet. Until you hire me, don't tell me anything you wouldn't want the other party to know. Until you hire me, don't tell me anything you don't want the other party to know. Right? Does that make sense? So that's what we mean by first substantial contact. And the test question can flip that around, make it sound a little different. They might say first initial contact. At what point do you have to talk about money and motivation? A, at first substantial contact. B, at first initial contact. And then a couple others. Don't let that throw you. First initial contact, what would that be? hello, my name is Neal. If they come into your open house you're hosting, right? You do the open house. Anybody been to an open house? Go to some. See how that agent does it. Because as a new agent, you might want to adopt a listing of another agent because you don't have any yet, and hold one open for them. Hold an open house open for them. And when you're doing that and a potential buyer walks in, you can talk to them for 2 hours about the Hornets and the Panthers and NASCAR and your kids and their kids and whatever else, and still never get to this point called first substantial contact. All that could just be talking. But finally, 2 hours later, they finally say, you know what? I was pre-approved yesterday for $300,000. Breaks. Oh, there it is. That wasn't breaks, but you know. And now it's time to talk about working with agents disclosure. Properly, you probably should have brought it up a little more proactively earlier. I'm just making the point of what first substantial contact is, right? As opposed to first initial contact. Informing them about their options. The Real Estate Commission, the NCREC, says BIC's brokers in charge should have written policies in place about what the firm offers or allows you to offer. Because here's the other thing. If you'll look in your Google Drive at the listing agreement, which I advise you do between now and next week, look at that listing agreement, and at the top of the page, it says this agreement is between these sellers, fill in the blank, and this. And this blank does not have your specific name in it. It has the name of the firm you work for. That listing agreement is not between you and the seller, it's between your firm and the seller. If you didn't notice, I did write a little explainer about sub-agency. Somebody asked a question. Did everybody see that on Notion? I wrote a little one-page explainer. Darnell saw it. Okay. It's in there. And this is basically what I was telling you, that the listing agreement is between the firm and the client, not you and the client. Now, you do sign on behalf of the firm, because that word sub-agent that we'll get more into in a moment applies with sub-agent to seller, right? We just talked about how before 1995, all agents only represented the sellers that were hired them. And so all agents were sub-agents for all the sellers. Sub-agents to seller. Doesn't mean that the seller even knew every single agent. Of course they didn't, across all different companies. But legally, the term was, I'm a sub-agent to the sellers. And we still are. We are sub-agents to the sellers until we're not. Until a buyer comes along and says, I want you to be my buyer's agent. At that point, for the house that buyer wants to buy, you're a buyer agent. You're not a sub-agent to that seller. And it gets a little confusing. I get it. So hang in there. It'll make more sense. Now, a firm can choose to not do things in a certain way. They can choose to charge 6% commission. They could choose to charge 4% commission and then offer other services in an a la carte, pick off the menu fashion. What might also be called a limited service listing. Anybody heard of that? Whether you see an ad that says, I'll list your house for $500. Some agents do what looks like a very cheap, low price listing amount. Now, the trick to that is what they're not telling you until you read the fine print is, yeah, okay, I'll list it for $500, but that means you're paying me, a listing agent, a flat fee of $500. You're still in the fine print going to need to pay a buyer agent commission to a buyer agent who brings a buyer. So you're not off the hook for $500. That just satisfies me because I've chosen to operate in this limited service role, but you still have to pay the buyer's agent. So your firm has the first and foremost authority to tell you, is that even allowed? And your firm might say when you interview with them, we don't do limited service listings. It's not how we operate. We are full service only. They might also say that, and we only do it for 6 or more. If you want to negotiate down, you have to get our permission to do so, or you're just not allowed to do it. Or if you do it, you take all of that cut off of your side. when we split our piece with you, but we're going to get paid a percentage of 6%, not a percentage of whatever you negotiated down. They have the say in it. Your firm decides what type of agency will be practiced. They decide what's going to happen when you co-broke with other agents, what's going to be offered. When you list a house, are you going to give the agent who brings the buyer half of that full commission? So if you charge 6, are you going to split it evenly, 3 and 3? You keep 3, you and your firm, and then you give 3 to the other side, the buyer's firm, buyer agent, and their firm gets 3. Or there might be a firm policy that you give yourselves a little bump. Instead of 3 and 3 that totals 6% commission, maybe you want to take 2, or you want to give them 2 and you take 4, or some uneven split. First and foremost, it's up to your firm. If you want to get creative like that, first and foremost, got to check with your firm policy to see if they'll let you get creative. And if they won't, if they say, no, we do it this way and this is it, that might be a reason that you decide to go away from that firm because you want to get a little more unique and creative. There's nothing right or wrong with that. It's just business choices. So the firm dictates and needs to have a written policy as per the Real Estate Commission about their splits, about their co-brokerage relationships, and about types of agency allowed. Do we only work with buyers? Some firms might choose to only work with buyers. I wouldn't do that because you would kind of leave half the money on the table. You're saying you're not going to take a listing and help a seller if it comes up and lands in your lap? They might say, yeah, we want to only focus on buyers. That is our thing. Or the other one. They could say, we only help sellers. We never work with buyers. Again, you're going to run into buyers when you're helping sellers, and you're going to run into sellers when you're helping buyers. Let's just keep it open. But the firm could, for any reason, decide to do it that way. We will talk about this more times. Now, the other important thing that I made mention in that single page answer is this. Remember the listing agreement? Top of the page, the firm is the agent. It says, fill in the blank as the agent. It's not you, the human person. It's the firm. Because officially, when you see the word agent in this class, first of all, think the firm is the agent. We are all conditioned through TV and movies and uncles and just water cooler talk. When you think agent, you think of some person who's in real estate. But the official concept is agent is the firm. So think of it that way. And the firm owns the agreements, whether it's a listing agreement or a buyer agency agreement. It's between that client and that firm. These are highly testable. So basic terms. You've seen all of these words so far if you read that chapter. The word agency is the concept of how brokers and firms work with consumers. The word agent kind of has a multifaceted definition. First of all, it's normal to think of an agent as a human person. But officially, in our purpose in this class and the test, the agent is the firm. It's the firm you work for. That's the agent. Subagency is that relationship between agents and sellers is one version of subagency. So all agents are subagents to the sellers that have listings on the market until they're not. Why might they not be? Because they're a buyer agent for one of them. If you're become a buyer's agent, now you're a buyer's agent for that buyer. You're not a subagent for the listing that they buy. Principal and client, same thing. Interchangeable. Let's look at it this way. There we go. The principal and the client is your client that you work for. The client is on your side. The customer is the other party. So if you help a buyer buy a listing, your buyer is your client, and the seller over there is your customer, is the customer to you. So looks like this. Buyer side, seller side. You're the agent for the buyer. And so your buyer to you, we'll say this is you over here. Your buyer is your client. It's also your principal. And to you, the seller is the customer. So there's these things called fiduciary duties we'll learn about in a moment. Do you think you owe more fiduciary responsibility to your own client or to that customer on the other side of the fence? Think of a fence. You obviously owe more to your own client. You still owe a couple of things to the customer that we'll learn about. You still have to know what you're doing and disclose. Disclosure and reasonable skill and care you owe to everybody, including that other customer, that customer on the other side of the transaction. They have their own agent. And to that agent, that person is their client, right? And then your client to that other agent is their customer. Hope that didn't mess you up. So just think of it as customers on the other side of the fence. Client is on your same side of the fence. That's the one who hired you. Subagency applies in two places. Seller's subagency. But also, remember this, when you take that listing, when you sign that listing agreement with that seller, if you look on the last page of it in the Google Drive, there is no place for the broker in charge to sign it. You don't take that listing agreement back and tell the BIC, hey, please allow me to have this listing. They're just going to say, you go do it. Just go do it. Don't bother me every time. When you list something, just tell me you listed it. Don't come and you don't need my signature to consider it being an actual listing. We are the only signature on behalf of the firm who signs the listing agreement or the buyer agency agreement. We sign on their behalf. Therefore, we are a subagent to our firm too. We're subagents to all the sellers. We're also subagents to our own firm because we get to sign on the firm's behalf the listing agreement and the buyer agency agreement, right? So this concept of agency is all about what responsibilities you have to your client. It's a relationship that exists when the client gives the firm authorization to act on their own behalf. The word principal could also be used like this: the principals to the transaction. The principals in the transaction. When you hear that, you know, okay, we're talking about a buyer and a seller, or a landlord and a tenant, or whatever the transaction is. It's the parties who are deciding to buy or sell to each other or rent to each other, right? The principals of the transaction. Agency is just kind of unique in this business compared to other industries. And that's why it's hard to grasp at first. So the word agent, why do they call us agents? We represent clients. It's because we represent people, not because we sell real estate. This concept of subagent. The firm is the actual agent, and the individual broker within the firm is the sub-agent representing the firm, right? So a broker, also known as a licensee. In fact, on the exam, you might see the word licensee pop up. They might say the licensee. That just means somebody with a real estate license. So the broker, human licensee, is a sub-agent of the firm. The firm is representing the client. They are the agent to the client. They are an agent to the principal. And then the broker within that firm, the licensee, represents the firm and takes care of this client on the firm's behalf. They're the ones who took that sign out there and put it in the yard or hired someone to do it. By the way, it's probably the licensee, broker, sub-agent to the firm person whose smiling face is on the sign. That's who's paying for everything too, by the way, for the most part. The firm might provide signs and lockboxes, maybe, but it's the person who everybody thinks of as the listing agent who's actually spending the money for advertising and going to the knocking on doors, say, hey, I got a new listing, and maybe making cold calls. Hey, I got a listing. You want to come look at it? Whatever they're doing. Facebook post, Instagram ads. That's at our expense. We are 100% commission for them usually. And the operating expenses are largely ours, which makes it all the harder to understand. Wait, the firm gets to be the agent and I have to ask their permission if I leave them and go to a different firm. I can't just tell my sellers the night before I break the news to my BIC, hey, y'all, I'm about to go to a better firm. So I'm going to be bringing the new signs out to you tomorrow. I need to come bring you some paper. Nope. Broke the law. You can't do that. You have to tell your BIC of where you're leaving from first. Hey, I'm looking for greener pastures. You're not it. You probably say it nicer than that. It's not me, it's you. And they have to make the call to your seller client and say, oh, she's no longer with us. Oh my gosh, did she die? No, she didn't die, but she made a terrible decision. She's leaving us, but we're going to take good care of you. We're going to reassign you to a better agent. They probably wouldn't say all that, but that's sort of the implication, right? And they don't have to let you take that listing with you because it's between the client and them. They're the agent on the listing agreement.
So, Neal,
Yes.
I have a question.
Mm-hmm.
So, what if the client wants to go with their agent?
Great question, and they usually do. So that BIC will have called them and said, oh, she's no longer with us. We will take care of you. And then they say, well, she's my best friend from high school. That's the only reason I even picked your firm was because she was with your firm, because that is the way it usually works. The firm has some choices. They could say, well, I'm sorry, you signed a listing agreement with our firm. We're not going to let you out of it. If they want to choose to handle it that way, they could do that and risk the wrath of that seller who's now probably going to make it really hard to show the property. You can't force somebody to allow showings if they're mad at the firm for not letting them out of it or not letting them go with their friend. They could choose to say, no, that's not convenient for me. Those 10 showings tomorrow between 10 and 2, not going to work for me, and make it pretty much impossible to sell. They could each kind of hold each other hostage. The firm, and I've heard of this before in real life, my friend left a firm, then we'll take our break, going to get us back on track. My friend left the firm she was at. They had a new corporate person in the position of broker in charge. Somebody came in from Florida corporate office and said, nope, you can't take your listings with you. In fact, when the sellers called that broker in charge and said, we want to go with her, she's why we even hired your firm to begin with, the response was, well, okay, for $500, we'll let you out of the listing agreement.
So, what if the client just decides to be very vindictive and say, you know what, we're just going to take our house off the market right now?
They can do that.
And is that a way for them to get out of the contract?
Well, the thing is, what we'll learn about when we see this listing agreement is a listing agreement, and any agency agreements, buyer agency listing, they are not unilateral. You can't fire your agent. Your agent can't fire you. You both have to agree to let each other out. So I guess I shouldn't say they can do that, because they would be held to that agreement for the entire duration. They could just put their plans on hold and basically not agree to allow showings until the whole agreement expires. There has to be an expiration on all agency agreements. That's another requirement. So It's just a matter of time. Ultimately, worst case scenario, if everybody's just mad at everybody, the seller can just ride it out and wait for the expiration to happen. Then they're free to do whatever with whomever.
Okay, thank you.
It gets messy. It could get messy. But the listing firm could also charge them to go ahead and let them out earlier than that expiration date. Let's go ahead and take our break. Come on back right at 11 o'clock. All right. The principal, also known as the client, also known as one of the parties to the transaction, buyer or seller, co-buyer, co-seller, landlord, tenant, whatever the transaction is, they're a co-party or a party to it. They hire the firm. The firm is the agent to act on their behalf. They can be any of these things: buyer, seller, landlord, tenant. And that firm has given you, a broker within the firm, the authority to work for that client on their behalf. And between you and me, if it weren't for you, the firm probably wouldn't have had the chance to list that property, because that's really the boots on the ground thing, right? It's because of us. Now, if it's a cold call straight out of the blue, that contacts you and says, come list my property, come list my house, talk to me about it because I heard good things about your firm, and they just call the firm number and it just happens to be routed to your phone that day, that can happen. But for the most part, especially once you get some experience and get some repeat and referral business, people start to know, oh, she's in the business. She'll take care of you. If they like you, it's pretty far down on the list before they finally think to ask you, what firm are you with? If you've already won them over, they don't really much care what firm you're with because they know you're going to take good care of them. But in the beginning, and when it's a cold lead that doesn't already love you or have trust in you yet, they're going to probably care more. And you want to align yourself with a firm that you feel like gives you a shot at earning their business because of maybe word of mouth, brand name recognition, whatever is important to you. The fiduciary is that person who is in a relationship of trust. The Real Estate Commission in the Real Estate Manual says fiduciary is someone who acts in a position of a special relationship of trust. An attorney always comes to mind. Your attorney can't tell people things that you've shared with them. They are able to keep it confidential. We too, we as brokers also can keep things confidential for our fiduciary client, a client to whom we owe fiduciary responsibilities. It could also be a guardian, an executor of an estate, attorneys and brokers. We're looking out for the client's best interest above everyone else's, including ours. We're looking out for the client's best interest above all others and our own too. Their interest above ours. Got to protect them. And that means we're not just telling them stuff that they like to hear. Sometimes it is our responsibility to tell them what they need to hear. Difference between a parent and a friend, depending on the age of the kid, right? Maybe they're not feeling of you so much as a friend in those middle school years because you're starting to have to lay down the law and they don't like it because their other friends' parents aren't so parental. They're more friendly and letting them do things that you won't let yours do. Sometimes we got to tell the client what they need to hear. That means, well, the last 3 agents said my house is worth $600,000 and you're saying 5. I can only share with you what the multiple listing service statistics of what has sold similar to your property are saying. I know you want 6, but maybe a year ago we could have gotten it and stretched because the buyers were falling all over themselves to get listings or get a place. But that market has shifted a bit. If we do it for $600,000, and I think it's worth more like 5, we're just probably going to sit around for a while. I'd rather turn you down now than let you down later. How about that one? That's not going to help you on the test, but that'll help you in real life. Your broker will give you more of those kinds of things later. Tell them what they need to hear. Stand in the place of that client. Look out for all the client's interest above everyone, including your own. Protect them even from themselves. Tell them what they need, not they want. It's a complex financial transaction. Is probably their biggest one, quite often. The largest financial investment for most. I think this number needs to be changed. It used to be that the average client buys or sells every 5 to 7 years, but after the last 2 or 3 years of multiple offers and competition driving the prices up, and people paying $50,000 and $100,000+ over asking price sometimes in some price ranges, I don't think people can afford to sell every 5 to 7 years in the future. We're not going to know for a while. This is brand new, but I have a feeling 5 to 7 just became 10 to 12 after these last couple of years in those situations. If you had to spend that much over asking price to get in it just to have a shot, you're probably going to be around for a while, depending on what the market does from here forward, right? The average agent sells a house. The average agent, you're not going to be average, by the way. The average agent does this, sells a house 6 to 8 times a year. There's not a lot of multiple competition. There's not a lot of width of competition. There's a lot of depth because there are a certain small percentage of agents who do a whole lot of business and are really good, but there's not like a commonality of that. There are 80, I think we're probably right around 80,000 active licensees, back to that now. It was funny, in May, the number was 84,000. And after July 1st rolled around and people didn't do their CE and various other reasons that they went inactive, it went from 84 down to like 78.5. Huge drop. But they're going
That's
to,
just in North Carolina.
in North Carolina, right? I have a feeling, I'm sure there some of them will scramble and do what they need to do to get back active again. But out of those 80-some thousand actively licensed agents, some of them are just selling insurance, working for the bank, just having the license on the side to help their uncle or their church friend or their soccer buddy 2 or 3 times a year. So it's not like you have 80,000 people just chomping at the bit, but there's still a lot out there to compete with. So what do we owe them? It's represented by this acronym, OLD CAR. OLD CAR is the acronym. The O in OLD CAR means obedience. You have to do anything they tell you, no matter what it is. Wrong. You have to be obedient to them, but only follow their lawful directives. If they ask you to do something that is illegal, it is your job to know it's illegal and say, no, I can't do that. Goes back to tell them what they need to hear, not what they want to hear. This comes up in various ways. It could be a license law thing, some sort of a ethics thing, because they might just be thinking, oh, it's just business. I'm going to somehow be unfair to this person. And here's one. We got multiple offers. We have 3 offers on my house. Let's counter all of them at the same time. What could possibly go wrong? Anybody have an idea why it might be a terrible idea to give 3 counter offers to all 3 of those buyers at the same time? We haven't learned much about offers and counter offers yet. That'll come in 9 and 10. But if you tell 3 people that you're willing to take this or that or the other, and they all say, okay, I'll do it, and they sign, now you better have 2 more houses. You better have 3 houses, 1 to sell to each of them, because you just counter offered and they accepted. So it'd be you as an agent to say, you know what, I know you want me to do this, but that's a terrible idea, and here's why. We also see this obedience thing in fair housing, because people out there say, well, oh, I saw that person look at my house. I don't want to sell to that person. And you all of a sudden realize it's because that person is in one of the 7 protected classes: race, color, religion, national origin, sex, handicap, race, color, religion, national origin, sex, handicap, and familial status. Any of those things, and they see the person or kind of get an inclination of it's in one of those categories, and that is why they're deciding not, then that's a problem. Best practice, avoid that altogether up front by making sure they know where you stand on that issue. Make sure they know that you are not going to compromise when it comes to fair housing issues, that you're there to help them sell their house, not to pick and choose based on a race, color, religion, protected class category as to which person should get to buy their house, because that's illegal. So a lot of stuff in this business, that and everything else, happens and gets diluted, gets made easier for yourself if you explain to them how it works way in the beginning, up front, in writing. Anytime you talk to them by phone, followed up with an email recap. Hey, by the way, remember we talked about this? And you're doing that so that next week, when they forget you told them this, you can say, oh, you know what? Remember that email I sent you? Here, I forwarded it to you again for your convenience. I told you that this is how this thing works, and this probably could happen, and this is why I think we should price it here, not there, or this, right? That help yourself, help your future self, right? Yeah. So obedience, but not just anything they tell you, the lawful things they ask you to do. Loyalty. Loyalty is a big one. You're loyal to them. Your duty to them is to give them your loyalty. This one comes up when we get to this thing called dual agency. Because if you're representing both sides of the transaction, a buyer and a seller in the same transaction, you cannot be loyal to them both. Impossible. So the loyalty is compromised when we get to a dual agency situation. We'll get more into that. Disclosure, this one you owe to everybody, the whole world. You certainly owe it to your client. If your buyer client wants to buy to put a dog grooming facility in, it is up to you to discover and disclose whether or not they're allowed to do it as per the private land use restrictions, covenants and restrictions, HOA rules, whatever, zoning ordinances. You owe it to your own client to disclose to them. What if your client says, and I had this happen, I was a listing agent. It was my first big listing. It was my second year in the business. I got like a $350,000 listing in Radburn, the university area. At the time, it was the only thing in that price point for like 5-mile radius. And I got this listing. And no, we're not meeting. Good question, Danita. Monday is a holiday. We will not have class on Monday. No class on Monday. I got that listing, and it turns out that buyer was coming from Florida. The buyer came. They made an offer. My sellers accepted. It went under contract. They had it inspected. They had an inspector come out. The inspector went in the crawl space, and the inspector moved some insulation around and found a little bit of termite damage. One termite, probably, had such a little bit of damage. It was probably one little termite who came up, nibbled a little bit, and went away forever. In fact, it was so little damage that if the seller had found it before we went on the market and they had some sandpaper in their pocket, they could have just sanded it off and blown off the dust and nobody would have known it was ever there. That's how little it was. But this buyer came from Florida. This buyer came from a situation in Florida with a big termite problem. Their little child, a little toddler, was running across the backyard and a termite swooped out of the sky and snatched it up and flew away with it. That's ridiculous. That never would happen. But termites in Florida are bigger. The problem is even worse than it is here. And they had a problem that cost them a lot of money in Florida. And so when they came here, they told their buyer's agent, I don't care what we buy, whatever it is, should never have a termite issue. If it ever had any history of termites, we are not buying it, period. So to that buyer, termites were an important situation. In fact, to that buyer, those termites were a material fact, because that was all it took for them to not want to buy the house.
Neal, I'm sorry. I've got a quick question.
Sure.
So you remember before we were talking about disclosures, and remember that you said that if someone died in a house, we did not have to disclose that?
Right.
And that if the potential buyer asked, we still did not have to disclose that information, correct?
If they ask, you do have the right to say, I'm not going to answer that question. But if they ask, you can't say, no one has ever died here. You can't lie about it. You have to be truthful, honest about it. But because that's one of the 3 categories of something called a stigmatized property. Death or illness, serious illness in a property, haunted, and then what's the other one? Anybody know? Death in a property, haunted house, or close to a convicted sex offender nearby. Sex offender registry, sex offender nearby. You don't have to offer up any of that information. But if they ask you, you could choose to, I refrain, I plead the 5th, I won't answer that. Or you could say, yeah, there is. You could answer it, but you have to answer it truthfully. You could never lie about it.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. So disclosure, we owe to everybody, the whole world, our client plus the customer on the other side of the transaction, plus that guy on the street who asks about our listing. And as a buyer...
How do you determine a house is haunted?
That's a whole other issue that thankfully you will not be tested on. So that's all that matters. But in real life, I've never run into it. I wonder, Margie, I doubt you probably have either. Any ghost hunters, ghost busters out there?
Oh, I couldn't hear what she said because there's so much an echo.
How do you tell if a house is haunted or if anybody is concerned? What is there a test? There are people that will, they burn sage. What's the word for when they walk through a property and they burn sage?
Rebuke.
Say again?
Rebuke.
No, well, it might be something that they say, but I'll think of it later. But there are,
Exorcism?
I'm sure, some services that will cleansing. Yeah, some version of cleansing. I think it's still another word I'm not thinking of. So yeah, I'm sure there's somebody willing to do something for money. You know,
Neal,
yeah. Mm-hmm.
do you have a minute for
Yeah.
me to tell a
Yeah,
story?
go for it. Sure.
Okay, can you guys hear me okay? Because I'm getting this. Okay. Okay, this is about 15 years ago at the closing table. And it was quite unusual because the buyers and the sellers were at the table with their representatives and the attorney. So we're just about ready to call it quits. And Mrs. Seller looks at the buyers, my clients were very young, and says, "You will love the ghosts. They are super cute and friendly. They're from the 1800s. My daughters talk to them all the time." My two young buyers turned white. They about fainted. The attorney and we didn't know what to do. And I mean, I'm originally from California and I never even heard of this there. So anyway, the attorney and I walked out, we chatted, and I said, well, let's just ask them what'll make it okay. So we go back in. Mrs. Seller is still talking about it. Mr. Seller looks like he's going to kill her. And he's trying to tell her to shut up, but it's not working. So anyway, I finally said, what would make you comfortable enough to proceed with the transaction? So the paralegal was already looking up things, and at that time, about 15 years ago, there was a Buster company in Charlotte. And so they set up that day from 6 p.m. till 6 a.m. the next morning. And they used an infrared instrument that they ran over walls and everything. And they determined that there was no spirits, which would be confirmed by heat. And it was this 10-page report. And they were satisfied, and we closed.
And Margie paid them $500 to give that result. And that
Oh, no, but it was something else.
yeah, there's, it comes back to this on the contract, and we'll get into this in 9 and 10. As far as a buyer buying, they do not have to go through with the transaction. You can't make a buyer buy it. Even if they do everything they do, the seller does everything they're supposed to do, the buyer can back out at any time. What's the penalty if the buyer backs out? A couple of checks. One called due diligence money. The due diligence money, they're going to lose it from the first time it goes under contract, from that minute forward all the way to closing. If they back out, they're always going to lose the due diligence money, period. Even if they back out for a great reason, like the roof leaks and the seller won't fix it, or the appraiser came out and says it's not worth what you agreed to pay for it. That buyer could say, well, okay, I want the seller to come down to the appraised value. The seller says, I'm not coming down. You crazy? This is a seller's market. The buyer could say, well, I'm not buying it, but they're still losing that due diligence money. The other check is called earnest money. The amount of time that a buyer has to do their research is called a due diligence period. And if they choose to back out after that due diligence period ends, the deadline, from that point all the way to closing, if they back out, they've lost the due diligence money already. They're also going to lose this earnest money. So it's just a matter of how much money are they going to lose by backing out. You can't just force them to buy it. So that kind of comes into play here. If they find out there's ghosts and they choose to back out, how bad do they not want to live with the ghosts? Bad enough to walk away from $10,000 due diligence and another $3,000 in earnest money, then that's a business decision that they have to make. Right.
I thought, Neil, and I don't know if you're going to cover this later, but I thought due diligence was basically something that states you have to be approved at underwriting by a certain period. And as long as you are, then that due diligence money goes back to the buyer.
That it's a due diligence money never comes back to the buyer unless the seller just flat out breaches. Earnest money can depend. I don't want to get into that yet, but earnest money could depend if it's an FHA VA loan. But the due diligence money is always gone, period, for the most part. You can just assume. And that's why it got really crazy. You know the market is crazy when that non-refundable money called due diligence money gets up into the 100,000 range. I heard from some people in my CE classes, one in particular, the one that pops out, I would always ask them, how much are you seeing? Either because you helped your buyer write it or you were on the seller side of a transaction. How much was the due diligence money in the deal? And one person said $400,000 non-refundable. And that was crazy enough, but here's the crazy part. How much was the price on that deal? The price was $400,000. That buyer came to play. They wanted it so bad, probably because they had lost several in a row, that they said, I'll just give you all the money today and we'll close in 30 days and you can go ahead and have the entire money non-refundable now. At closing, that buyer brought nothing. They might have brought a few bucks for like closing costs and stuff. We'll talk about that. That was pretty serious and quite unusual. And I don't think we're going to see that for a little bit, but
Who sets the due diligence?
sets it.
Yeah.
It's totally negotiable. Due diligence and earnest money are negotiable between the parties. But now we're definitely getting into 9 and 10. So let's put that off for then. We owe disclosure to everybody. We also owe confidentiality, but not to everybody. Confidentiality is what we owe just to our client. We owe confidentiality to our client. We also owe accounting, the responsibility of accounting, making sure that the checks they write, due diligence and earnest money, are handled carefully, and the paperwork and the files are handled carefully, accounting for those types of things. And then finally, reasonable skill and care. We owe reasonable skill and care. We need to know what we're doing. If we don't know, that's okay. You need to know how to go find out what you should be doing. That's why you need a good BIC and good resources, even after your renew. After your provisional goes away, you've shed yourself of provisional status, still have a nice stable of advisors to turn to. Out of this entire list, we already said we owe everybody disclosure. We also owe everybody reasonable skill and care. So the last two letters of these two words, old car, is what we owe to the whole world. The entire letters of old car is what we owe just to our client. Reasonable skill and care, you know how to fill in the form. You know which forms to use. You know the procedures and processes that make you a professional and them a consumer. Why even hire you if you don't know what you're doing? That's reasonable skill and care, and you are expected to have it. After you learn the laws and rules of this class and pass the exam, pass PSI, and you're out in the world in the wild, now you can start learning how the business is done. And a lot of that's going to be reasonable skill and care. And here's the forms for that. You don't really need to know a lot about forms. You're going to learn a lot of that in post-licensing as well. So obedience, we don't owe them just every obedience. We don't just do whatever they tell us, only the lawful things. We only act at their direction if it's a lawful instruction. We kind of, as a recap, we're loyal to our client, at the exclusion of everyone else, just to our client, including ourselves. That's where it comes in, where if it ends up somehow that it benefits the client's best interest, that you get paid less, then the client wins. The client above all others, including yourself. And we need to disclose your relationship with your client with anyone in the transaction. Are you representing them? Yes. You have to tell them. Make sure they know that you're representing this person over here. If we are on a listing appointment and you're looking at their house, at first you go there thinking you're going to try to get them to let you help them sell it. Put your sign in the yard. But as you're walking through it, talking to them and seeing it on the inside, you realize, gosh, I love this house myself. I want to own it. It would be improper. It would be wrong to not tell them. I might be your buyer. Shut up. You would never say that. I might be your buyer. Don't tell me anything you wouldn't tell your buyer. I might be that person. Therefore, don't tell me what you would be willing to take, the lowest amount, because you'd be telling the person on the other side of the fence, possibly. That's something that pops up in the license law and commission rules comment section, and it's called self-dealing. If you put yourself above them by not telling them you could be their buyer that you just now realized, you have self-dealt. You are guilty of self-dealing. You put yourself above them. You could, if you didn't know that law or rule, your business person inclination might be, well, let me just sit back and keep on talking as if I'm going to list it and see what I can find out. And then later I'll tell them I'm their buyer after I already know that, yes, you're listing it for $450, but you'll take $400 because you really want to sell it. You just don't want to tell the whole world. Let me go ahead and get that information first. Wrong. That gets you removed of your license potentially, right? So you can but you can still buy your client's property, but you have to fully disclose to them. What if you get the listing and then legitimately 2 months later, they're frustrated because it still hasn't sold yet. And then you start thinking, you know what? I've been thinking about buying another house or an investment property, or I kind of like this house. It's grown on me. Now I want to buy it. And honestly, you didn't plan on doing it initially. But then you decide you just have to fully disclose to them, look, guys, I know lots of things about your house that the average buyer wouldn't. But in order to solve your problem, I'd be willing to buy your house just with full disclosure so you know that I know things that you probably wouldn't normally tell. But that's just, it is what it is. If you want to sell to me with all of that known and in place, we can work this out. Full disclosure. So like that, you would want something in writing from them saying, yeah, I know that she knows more about me in my situation than I normally would want a buyer to know, but I'm okay with that. This last bullet point, you can't represent the adverse interest to them without their written permission. Tell me, Janina, is what just verbally agreed? Nothing. I guess I can probably even answer it without knowing the specifics. Everything should be in writing. Anything to do with your loyalty or your responsibility on their behalf and they're giving you permission needs to be in writing. If that wasn't your answer or what you're asking, let me know. You absolutely want to think, what if next year they start talking to their friend or their uncle and they find out, they start deciding they're mad about it? Let's make sure and button it up now so that you have protections for yourself so that next year if they decide to get mad about what happened now, they're not going to come back on you. So make sure you have it in writing now that they are allowing you to buy it, even though you know their bottom line or whatever the case may be. Good. Loyalty. Okay. If they give you an instruction that could harm themselves, we need to tell them. Don't just keep your mouth shut. They might tell you to do something, but it would cause them harm. The fair housing thing pops up to mind again because they don't know the fair housing laws. They might not be a raging, horrible, prejudiced, racist person, but they also might be. So in step one, let's make sure they understand what are the fair housing laws. And also it helps you. The more you can understand who you're dealing with as a person up front, gives you a chance to not work with them before you get into a situation halfway through a transaction. You're like, oh my gosh, this is the worst person I've ever met. They want me to do this because that person came from this, looks like this, believes in that. Let's go ahead and figure that out as early as possible so we can just not enter into anything with them and move on to the next one. That's a perfect world scenario. Well, the perfect world is that they're not that way. Second perfect is that you figure it out early enough to not be in a transaction with them. So we need to give them instruction. Tell them how it works. And tell them they might need to seek an attorney. So I had a situation a couple years ago. It was, let me think. She had let her daughter and daughter's boyfriend rent from her. Daughter and daughter's boyfriend stopped paying the rent. Boyfriend Interesting guy. Went for a whole year. She called me. This lady called me because I sold the house next door. She saw my name on the sign. She called me. She liked what I said on the website. And I went out and talked to her. She explained it. And I'm like, okay, this isn't as nice and neat and orderly as I would have liked. But let me see. It was a year before we closed, by the way. Spoiler alert. This was 2 years ago. So I listed it in November. The boyfriend would allow it to be shown, but it looked terrible. He was supposed to fix things. The bathroom was all torn apart. The living room was torn apart. I'm sorry about that, Danita. It's still out there. It definitely is out there, and it's terrible and it sucks. And I wish I could say it's better than it was. I don't know if it's how much better or worse it is, but it definitely is still out there. And I guess that's why those laws and rules are there. People just are funny about their own place, and they act different when they're renting it versus when they're selling it too. Even if there's some raging prejudiced person, if they're selling it, even the worst of the worst will say, oh, whatever, anybody can buy it, give me my money. But if they're just renting it, that's when the stuff comes out, because it's still my house. I don't want blah, 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 fill in the blank. So long story short, we went from November, we got a contract in January, obviously below market value because it needed so much work. He actually he did powder coating, which is basically kind of like painting motorcycle parts in the living room of the house. There were all kinds of issues here. People could come and see it, but he would promptly tell them how terrible the landlord, the seller was, and try to sabotage it. But we did go under contract because the buyer realized, everybody wanted that neighborhood. It was in Winchester in the university area. Everybody was scrambling to buy those houses. And so this smart buyer was like, well, I know, he got out through a COVID exemption for eviction. She had every right to evict him, but because of the COVID moratorium on them, he kind of leaned on that too, even though he didn't have it. We got to July, and finally he left. He finally left. He promised to leave many times. He never did, but he finally was out of there. We were finally okay to move forward, told the buyer. But then when I called my seller and she said, oh, great. But you know what, Neal, I've been thinking in the last 9 months, it's appreciated. I know I agreed to sell it for $220, but I want to raise the price. And I'm like, after all of that, and we're so close, and now you're changing the rules. I had to give her this advice. I had to say, well, you know what? I understand your frustration and concern. By the way, she had also put in a new heating and air system and a new roof without asking me if I thought she should. She went ahead and spent that money, spent another $20,000 on stuff. In the meantime, while he still lived there. Anyway, so yeah, I bet she did want to raise the price. But the thing was, we had a contract. And I told her, well, I want what's best for you. I would love if we could get them to agree to a higher price, but what we are limited to is the contract you signed with them. Why are you looking out for them and not me? I had to talk her through that. And I said, you know what? Best bet for you right now is to talk to the closing attorney. Get legal advice, because what you're talking about doing, she said, well, I just won't sell it to them. If they won't raise the price, I'll just back out of the deal. I said, that's called breaching a contract. And it could lead to a whole bunch of money penalty for you. They could sue you for specific performance. They could make you give back earnest money, due diligence money, pay them back for inspections, all this stuff. It's a big deal to breach a contract, especially when you're a seller. I had to just defer. Say, talk to the attorney. Well, you said you've been in the business forever. You should know the answer to this. And I said, I know. I do know the answer. The answer is talk to an attorney. That is legal advice that I can't give you. You know, it got ugly. She ended up going through with it. She didn't try to change the price. We closed, thank goodness. But I lost a couple of years on the heart health on that one. Disclosure: facts affecting value or marketability of the property. We have to disclose any offers. We have to present all offers. Okay, you're a listing agent. You've already gotten 10 offers on the property, and your seller said, I'm exhausted. I don't want to look at all these offers. I'm done. Let me just pick from these 10. Go ahead and tell everybody that the deadline is today at 2 p.m. Well, 2:30 rolls around, 3 o'clock rolls around, 5 more offers come in. It would not be proper for you to say to those 5, Sorry, you missed the deadline. I'm not presenting your offer. That's not allowed. You need to explain to your seller, you know what? I can appreciate the fatigue of multiple offer syndrome. It's a good problem to have, by the way, but I'm here for you. However, I can't not present offers to you. I have to present all offers, even if they come after the deadline. All offers, regardless of what if the offer comes in and you're like, are you serious? $400,000 house and you're offering 200. I'm not even going to dignify that with a response. I'm not even going to bother my seller because they're going to flip out and tell me and make my ears bleed with all their language. I have to suffer. I'm not showing it to them. Not allowed. That is improper. You have to present all offers, regardless of how bad they are, regardless of past the deadline. Even if you go under contract, they pick one. Everybody signs off. We are under contract. It's pretty much done. Now we just need to get to the closing table. There's still a lot to do, by the way, but it is off the market. And somebody brings you an offer, sight unseen, says, I know you said it's under contract, but here's our offer. It would be improper for you to say, I'm not going to present them that. That's just going to confuse them more. No, present all offers. Because why? It's under contract. What good is it? Well, they might want to say, well, this looks pretty good. Would they make it a backup offer and put it in place officially as the official backup offer? Now I've got one that I've agreed to, and if it falls apart, I also have one immediately to replace it with. Your seller might want that situation. So you've got to present all offers, regardless of time, regardless of how bad they might be. The identity and ability of parties to complete. Who's making the offer? Who's selling the house? Who is it, the owner, and can they perform? That's the important part here. Oh, the seller, you went under contract. You're the buyer's agent. You went under contract. You get a call from the listing agent and they say, oh, well, something just happened. I know we went under contract yesterday, but I didn't know my seller was 3 months behind on their mortgage. That's not a material fact that I have to tell you, but what I do have to tell you is they got a foreclosure notice in the mail today. This house is now in pre-foreclosure. There's a court date that has been set. And it doesn't mean that the deal can't still close. You could beat all of those foreclosure proceedings, and you probably will. And you could probably even call the trustee, the deed of trust. There's a trustee. There's somebody in charge of the foreclosure process. You could call them and say, look, we are under contract. I think we can get this thing closed and get all the money and have enough as seller proceeds to pay you what they owe you. Pay those 3 months that they are behind. So the ability of the parties to perform. If you get a foreclosure notice, you have to tell the other side. And on the buyer's side, and then we'll take our break. If the buyer finds out from their lender, oh, everything looked good on the loan, but it turns out the underwriter is not approving you for the loan. That is a material fact that must be disclosed. You're the buyer agent. You just got this terrible news. You need to immediately tell the listing agent, oh, loan was not approved. Now, that doesn't mean the deal is dead. A lot of things can be salvaged. I've seen many things come back from way further, deeper holes than that. Oftentimes, the two agents will start talking and say, well, have you talked to this lender? Have you talked to that lender? This one worked a miracle for one of my clients. Oh, what's the situation? Oh, some sort of qualifying ratio. Well, this other lender has more relaxed rules about that sort of thing. And you can sometimes scramble and the agent will help you fix it. Doesn't mean they won't not fuss at you. Just got to have a thick skin. Sometimes people take out their frustration on us. That's just part of the business, whether justified or not. And you have to be the mature one in the room. Material facts that affect the client or transaction. We'll talk more about that when let me see here. Wait a minute. Oh, sorry. Nope. It's only 11:40. I'm trying to be very attentive to break times and I got a little too attentive. So 10 more minutes and then we'll take our break. Let me make a note of that. Material facts that affect the client or transaction, like the termites. Oh, buyer doesn't want to proceed with the sale because it had termites and they don't want a house that ever had termites, even if it's not an issue anymore. That's a material fact because that's important to that buyer and they're backing out over it. They still lose the due diligence money, by the way. but that's in chapter 9 and 10 issue. Disclosure form. How do we tell them the deal of the ins and outs of the property? How do we find out what's wrong with the house? Inspection eventually, but even before the inspection, the seller has to disclose, has to provide a disclosure form on the property. But here's the nuance. The seller is required to provide a disclosure form, but that disclosure form is legally allowed to basically say nothing. I know. In the chapter, you will find the residential property disclosure form, and you'll see there are options for every item covered in the disclosure form. It looks like this. Is there a problem with this issue? Check here for yes, check here for no, or check here for no representation. That seller can check no representation all the way down the line, all 4 pages. Well, it's only like 3 pages of check marks. They could check no rep for everything. That says, I'm not telling. Seller has the legal right to say, not telling. Is the roof leaking? Looks like 2 different kinds of roofs. No representation. I'm not telling. If you went and listed that property, though, you're the listing agent, and you got there and they said, let me tell you about the roof. It leaks. Boom. They can still check no representation on the disclosure, but now you as a broker are legally required to tell everybody that the roof leaks. The minute they tell you a material fact about property condition, you have to tell everybody. So I would lead with that information to them. Look, guys, here I am to list your property. By the way, here's how disclosure works. Whatever you tell me, I have to disclose to everybody. You have 3 choices. Yes, there is a problem. No, there's not a problem. You can't lie about it, by the way. Or I'm not telling, no representation. No representation, I think, exists on that form mostly originally because, hey, maybe you never lived there. Maybe it's a house you inherited or a house that you only ever rented to people and you didn't live there daily. And so you don't know what's going on with it. So just legitimately no representation. I don't know. And I'm not going to try to find out. That's your problem. There's a Latin phrase when it gets to this stuff, and it's called caveat emptor. Let the buyer beware. The buyer has the legal right to have it inspected, have anybody he wants to come look at it, and give them their opinion. The seller can't hide issues, like they can't build a wall in the crawl space to hide the fact that there's a mold and zombie infestation in the back corner. That would be a latent defect, but they can just kind of let the buyer's inspector stumble across the termite damage and the mold as long as it's not something they actively tried to intentionally hide, right? So we as brokers get there and we say, look, anything that's a material fact, anything about the property, leaky roof, mold in the crawl space past a certain amount, you can check no representation and just say, I'm not going to talk about it if you want to, but if you tell me it exists, I as a broker have to tell everyone. That is the difference. We cannot fill out that residential. It's called an RPODS, Residential Property and Owners Association Disclosure. We as a broker can't. It's a little old couple. They're 95 years old. They have glasses the thickness of Coke bottles. They can't read fine print. And this form is really small print. So in the goodness of your heart, you just want to take it across the table and you start filling it out for them. Hey, tell me about the roof. Okay, that's a no. Wrong. Can't do it. We as brokers can't fill out that form for them. We can certainly tell them what plastic pipes versus polybutylene pipes mean. We can certainly help them in terms of, ask me questions and I'll guide you through it. We can't fill it out for them. Chapter 8 has a lot about the forms. We'll get into the forms then. We owe them confidentiality, obviously. If we all had to guess and we knew nothing, we'd probably guess that, yes, this is one of the things that you owe them. We've got to keep their principal information private, their price, their terms, their motivation, what they're willing to do. Because they might say, I'd be willing to pay $20,000 over asking price, but let's go in at $20,000 below asking price just to see. They might want to play it that way. So just because you know what it's going to take, what they're willing to come up to, doesn't mean you can tell it, obviously. Sometimes the seller will say, go ahead and tell everybody in the MLS that I'm a motivated seller, but don't take it upon yourself to do that without their permission. Smart play is to have that permission in writing. Sometimes you'll see that in Facebook posts, in MLS descriptions, motivated seller. I saw it yesterday. Motivated seller, and I thought, I hope he had permission for that. Sometimes agents get a little ahead of themselves and don't get permission. Accounting, we need to keep accurate records. We need to keep the money in separate accounts because that earnest money check that they wrote is not made out to you or to the seller. The buyer wrote that earnest money check and they need to write it to the person holding the earnest money. That could be your firm. Your firm might have an escrow account, a trust account set up to hold other people's money called earnest money. Other people's money. They can't keep other people's money in their own operating account. Your firm has an account from which they pay their light bill and their rent and buy more lock boxes and do all that they do. But that can't be the account that this special stuff called earnest money sits in. That has to be put into a special account called a trust account. And we have to account for that. Your BIC is responsible for that trust account to make sure it is reconciled. That's the word I was thinking about. That to make sure that it is reconciled every month and the right amount is in there. Keeping the client's money and the agent's money in separate accounts. Provisional brokers, they cannot hold that that earnest money check and that due diligence check. They can't just have it in their file for a long, long time. Should be about page 158 there, Robert. Provisional brokers, the newer ones that haven't yet released the provisional status, it's like a hot potato game. As soon as they get a check like that, they need to hand it off to their BIC, and then their BIC can handle it. But the provisional can't just stick it in the file and hold on to it in the back of their car until the deal works out or doesn't work out. They need to just pass it on through. In fact, the due diligence check is going to go straight to the seller as soon as we go under contract. The earnest money check sits in the escrow account, the trust account. Let's see. Can the trust account be one account for the whole? Yep. Correct. Shane, it can indeed be one trust account that holds everybody, all the various clients' earnest money. Good question. That would be even more complex and annoying. We have to disclose to the client if we're making a bonus. We have to disclose what our compensation is. They need to know that we're only getting 2% on this transaction instead of 3%, or that we're going to get 3.5% because that seller's paying us an extra 0.5% above what they normally would pay, or that they're also paying a bonus because you brought a contract to them within 30 days. Sometimes you'll see in the MLS, not in this market yet, but in a couple of years maybe, you'll start seeing bonuses offered again. And the seller will, because they're trying to compete with so many other sellers on the market, not a problem we have at the moment. They'll say things like, if you bring me an accepted contract by, what are we in? By September 30th, then agent to receive $1,000 bonus on top of the commission. But your client better know about that. And you better tell them about that before they even see the property, certainly before they make an offer on it and fall in love with it. You as the buyer's agent needs to say, and you just handle it as a joke. You're about to open the door to show them this property. You look on the form, you say, oh, gosh, I hope you buy this one. It gives me $1,000 bonus. Ha, ha, ha. Make it light, because you really should not care, right? Within reason. Certainly if it's a overage, like a bonus, don't let that be a reason that you try to get them to buy that property, is obviously what you're trying to avoid here. Now, we We need to disclose what money we're making. If it's a bonus, any sort of consideration, something of value needs to be disclosed to our client. Can't make money under the table. Got to be above board. The problem with this is, could it end up, because you're making this money, be something you're sharing with your buyer client because they really can't afford this house without that extra little bump? And the lender that's giving them money is going to care that they can't afford it without that extra little under the table chunk of money. Because if they can't afford it without that, then maybe they're riding the line too closely and they're going to be more inclined, more of a risk at ending up being foreclosed, which can cost the lender money. And at the minute we're telling the lender something that's not true, that is something called loan fraud. Loan fraud carries with it a maximum $1 million fine, 30 years in prison. We're talking about Martha Stewart prison, guys. And there's an actual agent. I won't give her name, but she doesn't care because she's making money giving speeches about her time in prison, because when I was brand new, she was showing houses from a limo. I remember seeing an advertisement, and she said on the banner of her real estate book ad, she said, from hanging out of the top of a limo, "This is how I show my clients homes." And I thought, well, good for you. Wow. Turns out she ended up meeting a guy who brought her in touch with other people and facilitated deals. And she said in her book that she wrote after the fact, after she spent a couple of years in Martha Stewart prison, the same one, by the way, the one in West Virginia, she got out and went on the speaking
That's a
circuit.
resort, isn't it?
Well, probably. It's a federal offense, but it's prison, still prison. And she said, I felt like something was not quite right, but I did it anyway. And so she's giving speeches on how to look out for that feeling and not commit loan fraud, because that's a big deal. We'll talk more about that later. We owe everybody reasonable skill and care. We got to know what forms to use, what blanks to fill in, how to fill them in, how to do the business. Our duties don't end with the contract. We get the contract signed. We now probably are going to do 60% of the job there is left to be done, because you've got to get that buyer through the inspection process and negotiate repairs, help them figure out, even down to like what type of homeowners insurance are they going to get. You're not giving them advice on that, but they're probably looking to you for suggestions on who to talk to. Just like you're looking to you for suggestions on who to use for the home inspection. Lots of things, all of which end up resulting in whether or not you get to the closing table. Because that's what it's all about during the under contract phase. Should I close or not? That's what that buyer is thinking. Is there anything I'm going to discover from here forward to cause me to not want to buy this anymore? And you, as a good buyer agent, need to help them through that process. We assist both sides in completing the transaction. This is a weird one, so hang in there. Even if you're representing one of the sides, there is some responsibility on your behalf to help the other side in some capacity. For instance, good example, for sale by owner. Anybody seen a FSBO, for sale by owner sign out there? So your buyer, you've shown them 45 houses. One day they call you excited and they said, I never liked any of those, but I found one. And the underlying subtext is, I did your job for you. I found the house without you. And you look in the MLS, you can't find it. And then you realize, oh, it's probably a for sale by owner. And you're like, okay, well, let me reach out to the seller. Let me find out if they're willing to work with an agent, because they may not be willing to work with you. You come to that seller. You say, look, seller, I see that you're selling your house yourself. First of all, congratulations. Welcome to the industry. We are now colleagues. In fact, you have a house to sell. You probably have more listings than most agents do right now because it's your one house, right? I have a buyer who likes what they see from the street of your house. They've told me that they're interested. But first of all, are you willing to pay a buyer agency fee? Will you pay me my fee that I charge for helping a buyer? And you might have to guide them through that. They might say, well, I don't want to pay a commission. That's why I'm for sale by owner. Why should I pay you? Basically, because my buyer won't buy your house without me being involved. Well, I'm not paying you. That doesn't even sound right. Okay, there are other choices. If the seller won't pay you, your buyer has already been explained to. You've explained to them, look, I'm going to try to get my pay from the seller's side, but if they won't pay me, or if they pay me what I don't consider enough for what I do, then I'm going to look to you to make up the difference. So your properly educated buyer should know that if they want to buy a for sale by owner, they might need to pay your fee themselves instead of it coming from the seller's side. All of that's its own thing. We'll talk more about it. But if you're in this situation, you're helping a buyer buy a house from a seller directly. There is no listing agent. You're the only agent. You're not their agent. You're not the seller's agent at all. You are only the buyer's agent. First of all, you need written disclosure to the seller that that's the case. Secondly, you're going to need to walk them through some things. They don't have an agent. They don't know how this works. So you're going to need to do some of the stuff that their agent would have been doing. Why? Why should you even bother? You're not getting paid by them. Maybe it's your buyer paying you directly. Because if you don't help them, who will? Will your buyer have a successful closing? Maybe not. It's probably easier for everybody involved that you step in and say, okay, seller, here's the offer. Here's what it means. I even did a net sheet. I don't know what you owe on your loan unless you want to tell me, but here's what you would end up getting. And oh, here's these disclosures that you have to provide. And here's what polybutylene pipes mean, and check yes or no represent. You have to go through that stuff. Normally their agent would do that. They don't have an agent. They chose not to hire one, so it falls on you. That doesn't seem fair. Nothing is fair except closing day. All that matters is closing day. The job description, what's the job description in this business? The job description is closing day. Forget what's fair. You shouldn't have to, well, did you close? Did you get your check? No. Then do what it takes to get closed and get your check within the laws and rules. Period. That is this business. Sometimes that might mean you need to buy a warranty. Well, that's not fair. It's not. Do you want your check? Then buy the warranty. You're about to make a $15,000 check. You're not going to cut a check for a $700 warranty. You might need to rethink the business. Sometimes you got to get to the finish line. Every time you need to get to, you're not getting paid until you get to the finish line. That might mean you need to step over for some unpleasant things along the way. How about that for an analogy? I just pulled that one from air. All right. That's this business. So you're going to need to do some stuff for that seller because it helps your buyer succeed in their goal of closing on that house. Right? Let's see. Catch up in the chat. Can they inflate the purchase price to cover your costs? Yes, that is the ins and outs of for sale by owner. That is a classic move. If that seller Rob's talking about in the for sale by owner situation, you go to them, hey, would you pay me a 3% buyer agency fee? I'm not paying you. Well, not at this price, but would you pay me at a higher price if we just figure out what 3% costs and tack it on to what you will take? As long as you end up getting, Mr. Seller, what you want after paying me, do you really care what you're paying me within reason? So that is a common way to accomplish and overcome that objection. Here's what we owe to the customer. We talked about what we owe to the client. We owe honesty, fairness, disclosure of material facts. That is what we owe to the person on the other side of the fence from us. Our duties to the customer, it's our duties as a broker to them for reasonable skill and care and disclosure. We're not talking about seller's duties. We're talking about our duties to them. So here's what they look like. The client, your client, the principal on your side of the fence that you're working for, you owe them everything, all of old car. The customer on the other side of the fence, the third party from you, the one who's the client of that other agent over there, you owe them stuff too in the form of disclosure, honesty, and fairness. And no matter who we represent, we have to disclose all material facts to everybody voluntarily. We can't just wait for them to ask us. The death, the haunted, the sex offender registry nearby, that is not a material fact. So that doesn't apply here. We do have a choice on those things to even bring it up. But this is material fact we're talking about. We owe it to everybody, even the cashier at the grocery store who says, "Oh, you're an agent? Well, I saw this house down the street." And you know about that house and that the roof leaks? "Oh, yeah, that house, the roof leaks." I mean, it's kind of like that. You owe everything to everybody when it comes to disclosing material facts. Doesn't matter who you represent. What is a material fact? Oh boy. Material facts. 1 second. Material facts fall into 4 categories. It's what we all think of. Let me just ask you now, list in the chat some material facts. Give me examples of what is a material fact. Lean toward things that are wrong with the house. Tell me material facts that are wrong. Problems. Oh, there you go. That's very specific, probably to someone's exact situation. Firewall missing on a duplex when you meant to buy the duplex as a rental. Insurance will make you repair to put the firewall up. Oh boy, a little sore point there, still fresh.
Yeah, I'm a little angry.
There was some anger typing happening just then.
Right.
Leaky roof, HVAC problem, roof problem, you got it. All that stuff, but it's more than that. All of those things are examples of material facts about the property itself, this number 1 item here. There are also material fact issues about the area surrounding the property. Oh, true story. You guys want to buy my house? Well, then I should probably tell you that within 2 miles away from me, remember last week I asked you if you could hear something? The gravel pit makes dynamite explosions happen. There's a gravel pit nearby. There's a noise issue. There's a speedway 5 minutes away. Twice a year, it's really noisy. Even in between then, it's really noisy. There's a drag strip. Sounds like I live in a terrible place. Who would want to buy this? Those are things about the area surrounding the property. Over at Highland Creek, Northeast Charlotte, there's what I affectionately call the Poop Farm. It's Wallace Farm. They sell great dirt. You can grow great tomatoes. And there's some really nice houses that are right across the street from that farm. And every now and then throughout the year, I've been told, you can smell an earthy aroma. And when I listed a house in Skybrook a few years ago, the other competing listings that were on the market didn't make a mention of it at all. But a material fact is also about the area surrounding the property. Flight patterns, airport flight pattern, or new road. Yeah, that's good, Shane. Road extension coming through. Number 3, can the principals to the transaction do what they promised to do? Can the seller really sell it? Well, not if they get foreclosed before closing day. So if that foreclosure notice comes in the mail, no, seller can't sell it. That is something that needs to be shared with the other side. And if the buyer's loan gets denied, they can't go through with it. The ability of the principals to act. By the way, testable. This is a testable item. Put it in your little journal. If the seller gets a foreclosure notice, that is a material fact that must be disclosed. What if the seller is 3 months behind, or for that matter, 6 months behind on their mortgage payment? They have not yet received a disclosure notice, but they're 6 months behind on their mortgage payments. Is that a material fact that must be disclosed to the other side? For 2 hours, I just pumped you up on being super sensitive to giving full disclosure about everything. So it's natural that you would think, well, yeah, let's just be safe. Yes. But in fact, testable, no. That is not a material fact because it's just payments being late. I guess the rationale here is they could make those up with no ramifications. Till that foreclosure notice comes through, late on a payment is not a material fact. Late on a payment is not a material fact. And then finally, number 4 goes back to the termite story. If it's important to the principal, it's a material fact. If they say, I don't care that there's no termites anywhere, fact that you found the least bit of surface damage and it's not even there anymore, there was a termite there at one point, that's enough for us. We're out of here. If it's important to the principal, it's a material fact. That's a pretty big blanket statement, huh? About the property, of course, that's structural, mechanical. These are things that you're trying to discover through the process of the inspection, right? Through the inspection process, you're trying to learn what is wrong with it structurally and mechanically. Does the dishwasher work? Water heater, HVAC, stuff mentioned a minute ago by Jennifer, in fact. Those are things you're looking for about the property that an inspection will uncover. What are some other things? Give me more. More structural mechanical things that show up on an inspection. Attic, mold, good. Electrical, huge. Water damage. Covenants and restrictions, yeah, that's a good point. A little different departure, but you bet. Yeah, that's about the property, sure. Related to the property, like nearby. Zoning. What's the zoning? Landfills nearby. That's another case with me. I can see the speedway and I can see a nice little grassy knoll a couple miles away, and it's the landfill. It serves 7 counties. It's like a major scientific achievement. They turn that stuff over all the time. It doesn't look like this picture. It looks actually like a park with little Tonka trucks driving over it. And I'm not close enough to ever smell it, but I've sold houses near it who could. And there's price points 500 plus within grocery bag distance away, meaning occasionally you'll see a plastic grocery bag fly out of the landfill, land in the front yard of some of their houses. Airports, flight patterns, ability to perform, buyer's side, loans denied, seller's side, foreclosure notice, or bankruptcy. They decide to declare bankruptcy and walk away from the house and the deal. That could lead maybe that'd be considered a breach perhaps. Then we're getting into some legal territory and you stay out of it, point them in the direction of an attorney. If you're a seller who is under contract says, I'm declaring bankruptcy, that's out of your hands. You need to tell the other side, point them to an attorney, sit back and not spend the check that you would have made on that until you see how that turns out. And here's our reminder about the being behind on the mortgage payments. That is not a material fact. Special importance to the parties involved, the principals involved. Could be a home business that they want to do. Could be pet restrictions. We see pet restrictions also in insurance coverage. There's a hot list, like a 10 or 12 breed list of insurance providers. They don't want to know that, or they don't want there to be the case that you have this certain breed in your house sometimes. Rules and covenants, specifically important to the property. Okay, another highly testable topic here. Another little 3-item type of a list. Is it a material fact if the house has what's called polybutylene piping as the plumbing in it? Do you notice the trend here? I ask you these leading questions and get you to answer it, and it's wrong. In fact, poly pipes look like this, first of all. They're gray. They tend to look like this. And it's not usually the length of the pipe that goes bad as quickly as the actual fitting itself. But somehow or other, and I just saw it yesterday, a Facebook friend of mine showed a picture of the fitting squirting out water in his basement. He didn't find it for like 2 days. Polybutylene pipes can leak. Something about the water inside, the chemicals, maybe the treated water, corrode, somehow eat away at these pipes, these fittings. Over time, it's a class action lawsuit from the 80s and 90s. Houses built in the 80s and 90s have a lot of poly piping. For our purposes as a broker, if the house has polybutylene pipes as its plumbing inside, that is not a material fact. Write that down. Presence of poly pipes is not a material fact. What is? If those polybutylene pipes have ever leaked, now it's a material fact. Everybody gets this wrong. Agents in CE. Last year, our CE involved a big section on material fact. Or is that this year? That's this year. And they get it wrong all the time. Polybutylene pipes, the presence of, in and of themselves, not a material fact. But if they have ever leaked, now they are a material fact because there might be another leak. You fix that one fitting, but what about the one across the house or right next to it? The thing about it is these pipes, you'll notice, are in the walls and in the floors, and you don't see the leak for a while, like my friend yesterday. You don't see the leak. He only noticed the leak because his air conditioner kept running because what was leaking was the hot water. And so it was like a steam bath in his crawl space from all that water, all that hot water. So it was affecting the temperature inside of his house. I mean, that sounds terrible. Poly pipes that leak, even if they've been repaired or replaced. What if they don't leak anymore? They fixed those fittings. Still a material fact that must be disclosed. How do you know? Was that the next question you had? You may not. It's on the seller to disclose it, and you as a broker to tell them that they have to disclose it. But what if they don't know because it was not while they owned it, but what about the previous one, and did they lie? Well, some of that's just going to fall through the cracks. Other ways you can find out about some things is we'll learn about in the insurance chapter something called a CLUE report. It's an acronym, Comprehensive Loss Underwriting Exchange. Comprehensive Loss Underwriting Exchange. Look it up. Google CLUE report. An owner, a seller of a house, an owner of a house can get a free one every year, just like a free credit report. And it covers major claims against the insurance policy. So that might be one way to find out, was there ever a claim about poly pipes that happened? Get a little creative. Put your private investigator hat on. Might be necessary sometimes. Poly pipes. The next one is synthetic stucco. That's the picture on the right. When I got in the business, it was all the rage. It was what all the elective continuing ed classes were about because people were scared of synthetic stucco. Synthetic is not the same as hard coat or real stucco. Synthetic is also known as EIFS stucco. I do not know I never remember that acronym. But here's what that looks like. The issue is how they are built. Synthetic stucco, let me bring up a couple of pictures here. It gets ugly because it catches you off guard. It sneaks up on you. Because the problem is, you've seen it. Even that picture that you're looking at before I hide it there on the far right, you see those little jut outs over the windows? They make little perfect 90-degree angles, and water gets caught up there. And if that little angle above the window is not kept sealed with caulk, water gets back in there and it ends up looking like this. If it's back in there and you don't know it, it's rotting those walls from the inside out like a house cancer. And by the time you see any evidence of this happening, it looks like this when you start peeling the layers back. The reason it happens is the synthetic stucco is built this way. Very convenient. Here's the 2x4s, those three in a row. Those are your typical studs in a house. Then you've got the wall, the exterior sheathing, and then you've got the stucco. The synthetic stucco material is mashed right up. It's like a sandwich. So if water gets back there, it's staying back there. There's no room for it to fall away, drain away, air out. On a brick house, as well as a regular hard coat real stucco house, instead of this situation, you've got an airspace back there. So if moisture does get back there, it can go down and out. That's why at the bottom's about 2 feet up off the ground, usually, of a brick house, you'll see little gaps in the mortar. That doesn't mean they missed them. That means they left them open so that water could get out from the airspace in the back. There is no airspace in synthetic stucco, sort of like that. That's the big problem. And it's okay if you do it right, install it right, and maintain it. But the minute you don't maintain it and the water gets back there, that's the issue. So it's such a big deal, big class action lawsuits, such a big deal that even if the entire house got replaced, meaning it was synthetic stucco and somebody had this problem, and so they had the money available to them, they took every speck of a synthetic stucco off of the house and just bricked it back up. So now it's a brick house. It doesn't have any synthetic stucco on it. The fact that it used to be a synthetic stucco house is a material fact that must be disclosed. Even if you've repaired it, even if you've replaced it all the way, because that rot could still be happening underneath. Even though they took off the synthetic and put up the brick, you're not going to have future rot probably, but you've got existing rot that's taking its time to uncover itself. Synthetic stucco is a material fact, even if you've repaired it or replaced it. And my favorite one is the meth lab. Walter White, Breaking Bad. Anybody see Better Call Saul? They ended it. Were you happy with the ending? Didn't like the ending? Did you want him to have a better life or a worse life at the ending? We won't spoil it for anyone. Meth lab. If the property was used to produce methamphetamine, it releases horrible toxins that can stick and stay in the wall, in the sheetrock, in the surfaces, and come out and affect people way after it was a meth lab. There was a case where the lady was pregnant. She and her husband were renting a place, and somehow or other she, I don't know, maybe had to get tested for drugs or something, and it was uncovered that she tested positive for meth. And of course, being pregnant, the more authorities became concerned, and she got kind of potential trouble. Come to find out, it was because the place they were renting was emanating that toxicity from the walls, and she had ingested enough of it to have read a positive reading in her body. Now, I'll jump to the spoiler alert. The baby was fine. It wasn't enough. It didn't affect the baby. They did realize it wasn't because she was a user or a producer of it. It was because of that situation. How do you fix it? Gosh, you won't be tested on that, but it could result in unfixable. Tear it down, rebuild it. It could be take it down to the studs. It's expensive. That stuff gets in deep and it's lethal. It's toxic. Therefore, if you know about having produced meth with this property, then that's a material fact. So these are always material facts, these three items. Prohibited conduct. Oh boy. Now you're going to notice.
Ashley.
Oh, did I miss a comment?
Look at Ashley's comment.
If it's not blown up. That's true. You know, those meth cooks aren't known for their chemical expertise, are they? Yeah, that's good. So we covered about a third of the license law and commission rules material the first day, and that's going to come back around and we'll finish it up later in the syllabus. But here's the part where we deal with some of it along the way, because this affects your agency. This is hand in hand with our responsibility as agents for people, right? So this is covered in your textbook, but it's also covered in the License Law Commission Rules Comments, pages 4 through 7. It's where they outline material facts and misrepresentation and omission. Let me, here we are. So in your comments PDF, there's page 1. We just kind of scroll on through to page 4 and boom, bottom of the left column. Prohibited acts by licensees, we'll get into that. So then it gets into what is misrepresentation versus omission. It can get confusing. You know what omission is. Your mom accused you of it when you were a kid. She said, you lied to me. And you said, no, I just didn't tell you. And she said, no, you lied by omission. You left it out and you should have told me. Well, misrepresentation is you communicated false information. Omission is you failed to provide or disclose information. Now, did you do either one of those on purpose or by negligence? You should have known better, but you did it wrong. That's where willful versus negligent comes into play. So, misrepresentation and omission. I would pull this out while you're studying this chapter 7 and read. If you should have already read this at least twice, by the way. But if you haven't yet, go ahead and read these pages 4 through 7 because it takes it case by case. Well, they do talk about the sex offender nearby, and they talk about, the place you can go find sex offenders. And then we get on down to page 5, willful misrepresentation. On purpose, you told the wrong thing. You didn't leave it out, keep your mouth shut. You actually expressed it. You said it either through writing or words, verbal, and you did it on purpose, willfully. Willful misrepresentation. A licensee has actual knowledge of a material fact and deliberately misinforms. Notice the examples. That's what you really want to key in on.
Lying. It's lying.
Yeah, there's a great one-word definition. It's just plain lying. The test is going to come at you this way. They're going to ask you questions like this. Example 1. They're going to paint a picture, a paragraph. They're going to say, an agent knows a listed house has a severe problem with water intrusion in the crawl space during heavy rains. Is that willful misrepresentation, negligent misrepresentation, willful omission, or negligent omission? Which is it? And it's surprisingly confusing. A good rule of thumb when you're trying to tell the difference is to don't worry about the willful or negligent part first. Figure out if it's misrepresentation or omission first. Did they just leave out the information and not say something, or did they say something wrong? Just because they said something wrong doesn't mean they did that on purpose. They might have thought and believed in their whole heart that what they were telling was the right thing, but they told the wrong thing. Now figure out, did they do it on purpose maliciously, or did they do it negligently because they didn't know better? So, an agent knows there's a problem with water in the crawl space during heavy rain in response to a question from a buyer who they're showing it to during dry weather, no rain, no water. The agent states there's no water drainage problem. It's willful misrepresentation because they know better. They're taking advantage of the dry day where there's no sign of it, and they're just rolling with it. Is there a problem? Doesn't look like a problem to me. It looks dry. So no, there's no problem. But they knew better, and they intentionally said so. They lied. What about this one? An agent knows the heat pump at a listed house does not work, but tells the buyer all systems are working order. Good condition. Straight up lie, right? This next one is my favorite because it's done all the time. So right now, we could probably find a couple of examples if we went through the MLS right now. It might be a little harder to tell, but an agent knows that the approximate market value of a house is $225,000. They know this through their research of checking other similar houses for sale. They know it's worth, and it's only going to get up to $225,000, but they tell the owner, "Oh yeah, you want $250,000 for it? I can get that." Because if I don't tell you that, you're going to hire one of the other 7 agents you're talking to. So I'm going to tell you what you want to hear so I can get my sign in the yard. That happens every day. It probably just now happened in the last 10 seconds. Agents, what I call buy listings. They tell the seller what they want to hear, even though they know it's not going to sell for that, because they're hoping that I'll get my sign up, they're going to love me, and over time I'll get them priced down. I'll get them to lower the price down to where it needs to be. But let me just get it now. Go ahead and get it signed and get that listing. That is a willful misrepresentation. What if somebody later on finds out, oh, wait, my agent told me I could get $250,000, but it took me a year. And by the time I finally sold it a year later, everybody thought something was wrong with the house. It was only because I priced it too high on the advice of my agent. Nothing was wrong with it, but they thought it was. And so I ended up having to sell it for $200,000. That's what happens. The longer something sits on the market, more people assume something is wrong, and it's not just price. They figure it's something hidden that they're going to end up having this huge mountain of money to fix. And so it ends up taking longer to sell, and the longer it takes to sell, the lower it ends up selling for. That's a willful misrepresentation if you intentionally tell them it's worth more than what it is, especially to that level. So go down through these, read these examples, think hard about them. The next one in the lineup is misrepresentation negligently. Negligence, that means you told them the wrong thing, not that you left it out, but you told them a thing, and it was because you were too lazy to check into it, right? You were negligent about it. You should have. Here's the word, here's the phrase. A reasonably prudent licensee should reasonably have known. Boy, that word reasonably is all over the disciplinary proceedings. When they're deciding your case and you're in trouble, they're saying, would a reasonable agent have known this? Or would a reasonable agent have done it this way? That's sort of the weight against which you are compared. Misinformation, they mentioned common situation is recording incorrect information about a property in the MLS because they didn't check it out. Oh, you know what? It's 10 o'clock at night. I'm putting this listing in the computer right now. I don't know what it's zoned. I don't want to go pull out the file. It's probably zoned residential. Boom. Put it in there. Forget to check it to be sure later. Turns out it's not residential at all, right? Things like that can happen very easily. Or if you're a big shot and you've hired an assistant to put the listing in the MLS for you, this is just as bad. And they put in the wrong information through straight up negligence, or they're just lazy. Doesn't matter. It falls back on you. So make sure the right thing is put in there. Here's some examples of negligent misrepresentation. Let's look at the second one. An owner tells an agent with a firm that the house has 1,850 feet. The agent does not verify it. That's a problem. And records it, tells the whole world it's 1,850 square feet, puts that in the MLS. It's then sold by another firm, another agent. And that person tells them that according to the MLS, it has 1,850. The buyer then discovers later it only has 1,750. So the listing agent did not make a direct misrepresentation. It was done because they put the 1,850 in the MLS, and then that was reported back to the buyer. They initiated the chain of communication, leading the buyer to be misinformed. So the listing agent failed to verify, and that constituted negligence. So they're guilty of negligent misrepresentation. Now, the selling agent was the one helping the buyer, because we know this, ing, selling, they're helping the buyer. They directly communicated that incorrect information to their client, to their buyer client. And they probably acted reasonably in relying on the MLS data. We don't have to verify every single thing we read in the MLS, but if they had a reason to doubt what they were seeing, because they know they've shown enough houses, they know what 1,850 square feet feels like, and they could recognize that it's 100 feet less than what they're saying. Not everybody can do that, by the way. That's a learned skill. If they did realize that, then they could be in trouble too. If they did not have any reason to doubt the MLS data, then they're not guilty. They're not guilty of negligent misrepresentation. We as brokers are responsible for having enough awareness to know of a significant square footage discrepancy. If it's sufficiently large enough that a reasonably prudent, there's that word again, reasonably prudent selling agent should have known that the listing data was incorrect, then they are guilty too of negligent misrepresentation. So the listing agent is the one responsible for what's in the MLS. And for the most part, buyer's agents should reasonably be able to assume and expect that information to be right. But they also have to be knowledgeable enough to know, oh, is this making sense? This house feels smaller than they're saying it is. And recognize that, because they could get in trouble too. So look in that comment section. Let's look at the slides, and then we'll come back. These four, these are huge, guys. This is problems. You know there's going to be these kinds of problems on the test, period. So the willful versus negligent, the agent knew something, willful. Negligent, they should have known. They were either lazy or just didn't bother to check into a thing. Misrepresentation, they lied. Omission, they kept their mouths shut. Forget what your mom said about lying by omission for this class, because that's going to mix it up. Use these two as independent things. Misrepresentation means lied because you said either written or verbally something untrue. Whether you did that on purpose or not is yet to be determined. That goes back to, was it willful or negligent? But did you do it, misrepresent, or did you just not say something you should have? Here's how the omission thing could happen. You're looking at a house and the neighbor's houses are fenced, but yours is not. The one you're looking at is not. And you're in the backyard with them, with your client. And here's the house that you're looking at, and here's the lot. And there's the neighbor's lot, and there's the other neighbor. There's their little houses. And both of these neighbors have fences. So this one's fence does this. It pretty much looks like it's following the property line exactly. And so does this one. So you're looking out back there, you and your client, and also what the client notices is there's a row of trees back here, Leland cypress, that grow nice and big, provide screening. And they look out there and they say, oh, well, do you think those trees are on the property? Well, your first answer is, that's a great question. Let me look into it and find out. You might be tempted, what if instead of the trees being there, that looks like they're here, and you have a trained eye, so you're going straight to the neighbor's fence lines, corners, and you're like, because you don't see this white line across here. In real life, you're not seeing the property line show up. You're going off of things like shrubbery and fences. It would be wrong to say, or for them to say, well, I'm assuming that because the neighbor's corners are here and here, that my line is here too. And you just keep your mouth shut. That could lead to a problem with omission, right? It's better to say, let me find out about that. Let's check into that. Let's ideally have it surveyed. First of all, a good preliminary thing is to see if the seller has a survey that they could share. But the buyer, by the way, still needs to have their own survey done. So omission means you kept your mouth shut. Here's our stigmatized properties again. Was there a death or suicide in the house? You do not have to disclose it. What if they ask you? You have two choices. Number one, I refuse to answer that question. That's probably not going to lead anybody to feel warm and fuzzy, but you could say it. Number two, if they say, was there a death or suicide? And you cannot say, no, there wasn't, if you know that there was. You can't lie about it. Registered sex offender nearby. Oh boy. This one is uncomfortable. Because what if you're selling this and your buyer client has a kid or 5 kids and they're asking you, is there a sex offender? It looks like on the website that right across the street, right next door, wherever, close by, at the bus stop where the kid's going to be standing, that there's a sex offender in that house. I don't want to buy this house. Is there a sex offender? You don't have to answer it. The thing about it is, why is this not a hard and fast absolute? Kids are in jeopardy here. So why isn't this like a absolute, got to tell them? It goes back to the point of the real estate commission. They're there to protect the consumer in buying and selling houses. I think my opinion here, my guess here is, what if that sex offender who is registered at that address, well, guess what? They did a pretty terrible thing. They got busted for it. They went to prison for it. They're out. Now they're registered maybe for the next 10 years, maybe forever. Do they have a track record of honesty? They might say, I'm going to live in this house as soon as I get out of prison while I'm on parole. But they might end up leaving that house, going somewhere else. What if they were in that house for 2 days and then they went away and disappeared or went somewhere else? And the registry still shows that house as having them. In the meantime, the house next door goes on the market. And one by one, buyer after buyer chooses not to buy it because they think next door is a sex offender. But it's really not even there anymore. They went away. The registry is wrong. I don't have this for a fact, but the last I heard anything about the stats of the sex offender registry, 40% wrong. That inevitably affects that property owner because their values have gone down because people don't want to buy it because of false information. That's the roundabout way that I could figure why this falls under stigmatized property. Haunted house, we talked about. These are not material facts. You do not have to disclose them, but you can't lie about them. So, should a seller suspect their home is haunted? They see strange shadows. They feel an odd presence. Do we as brokers must the homeowner disclose this to potential buyers? Does the seller have to disclose this? Stigmatized? No. In fact, what if the roof leaks? They don't have to disclose that either. Seller doesn't. Broker does not have to disclose this haunted situation unless we're asked, and we can't lie about it. We have to tell the truth, or we could plead the fifth. Stigmatized property does not create a material fact. What other duties do we have on behalf of our client? We have to account for the funds. We have to be competent, act competently. That's what you'll learn after the laws and rules. Once you're out there in the wild in the business, learning from your BIC, your trainer, whoever you pay, there's lots of courses. There's lots of coaching available. I've spent many, many thousands of dollars on many, many hours and hours of course of coaching and training materials over the years just to get better than the next person. Act competently. Deliver all offers, no matter what they are. Disclose the commission, what you're earning. Here's the thing about the money. If you're getting paid in a transaction, you have to disclose that to your client. Your client deserves to know all of that. There is one thing that is none of their business. When you get paid, you get this money from the sale, it closes, deal closed. That attorney is going to give you a check, and you're going to carry this check back to your firm and turn it into your firm with the paperwork. And this check is going to get divided. Some of the money is going to your firm and some of the money is going to you. Let's just say the deal with your firm is they keep 20% of the check and you get 80%. It is none of your client's business what your split with your firm is. That is not something they deserve or get to know. But everything else about all this part of the money is their business. How much was the buyer agent commission? How much did you make total? Then what you split with your firm, none of their business, but everything that came up to the door of the firm is their business. Bonuses, tickets to the game as an incentive from the builder because you brought a buyer for their house that you sold within a certain time period. Things of value. With that, we got a few more minutes. So that's the commission and the items of value. What you are not allowed to do is make false promises. Boy, salespeople and false promises. Undisclosed conflicts of interest. If there's a conflict of interest, you have to disclose it. Here's an example. Let's say you're talking, you sell houses, but you also are a property management company. On the side, you manage other people's houses that they rent. You collect the rent for them. You go to handle the eviction if needed. So you have a property management company as well as helping people list and sell. And you're helping your seller. You're a listing agent, sell a house. The buyer comes along and they have their own agent, and that buyer wants to buy your listing for an investment and immediately put a renter in there. If somehow that buyer found you, because it's not that hard, we put ourselves everywhere. They could find you through Facebook, through Instagram. Your number is everywhere. They can text you directly somehow or other. If that buyer were to reach out to you during the negotiation and say, you know what, we're only $2,000 apart on this deal. If you can convince your seller to come on down a little bit, then I'll hire you on your property management side and use your services to manage my property. But it's not going to work unless I can buy it, and your seller won't come down anymore. See what you can do to make that happen. Clearly wrong, upside down and backwards, right? That's an undisclosed conflict of interest. You're potentially putting pressure on your seller to take a lower offer because it's going to benefit you later in the form of the property management deal, right? Improper conduct, that's a fun one. That's just kind of a blanket statement. Hey, just don't do things wrong improperly. There's a couple of things like that in the license law and commission rules. Violating anything that's a rule is against the rules. That's a named item in the license law book. Might be a commission rule, actually. Violating any rule is a violation. So you're guilty of whatever the rule is that you violated, but also guilty of violating that rule because it's like, okay, we got it. You got it covered. Coming and going. If we don't do what we're supposed to do, if we break these laws and rules that you're learning in this course, which is the only sole reason for this course is to learn these laws and rules, that leads to this disciplinary action by the commission. We know what those 4 things are: reprimand, censure, suspension, revoke. It could also lead to you being sued, civil suits, right? And some of them could lead to criminal prosecution. This is the part where you rethink whether you even want to do this, because I'm scared you to death about going to jail forever. I'm just kidding. It's not that bad. But you are subject in some of these areas. You're not going to do the wrong thing, so it doesn't matter. Disciplinary action from the commission, getting sued civilly, as well as criminal prosecution are all possibilities of breaching your duties as a broker. We must act in good faith. We need to, these are the seller's duties. The seller has some duties in this relationship. They need to do what they are hiring you. They need to do the things required on their end. They've hired you to help them sell, so they need to make the house available for showings within reason. They need to provide paperwork to you and to the closing attorney and to help facilitate the transaction. They need to act in good faith. And they need to pay you. Oh boy. At what point have you earned your commission? When have you earned your commission? Just randomly. You have no reason to know this right now, but I think it sticks better if you make a guess and you're wrong. That's a great guess, guys. I put such an imprint about this closing thing earlier that this is exactly what I would guess too. But there's a difference between when you earn it and when you get paid. When you've earned it is different than when you actually get it in your hand. Closing is when you get it in your hand. At closing, you get the check from the attorney made out to your firm. You go back to your office. You submit it to your BIC or office administrator along with all the paperwork. Because, by the way, they're not going to give you your cut until you give them all the paperwork they require. It's the only way they can guarantee that they get the paperwork, because we're terrible about paperwork as a rule. And you finally get your piece. But that's at closing. Did you earn it before closing? Yes, you did. You've earned it before you get it. The litmus test here is, did you produce a ready, willing, and able buyer? That is the point at which it is considered you have earned the money. You don't get paid the money then, but that buyer, you listed the property, the buyer's agent brought you an offer, the seller accepted the offer, and the buyer obviously was willing and able. Well, they were willing because they brought an offer. Were they able? They were ready and willing. That's the word, ready, willing, and able. They were ready, they were willing, but were they able? Did they bring you a pre-approval letter? And so now they have to get a loan approved? Well, then maybe the case could be made that they weren't quite able. That hasn't yet proven yet. Or is it cash? More and more buyers are paying in cash. Oh, proof of funds? They have all the money. Now it's just a matter of making sure the inspections go well. Case could be made that if it all falls apart and your seller goes crazy and wakes up and changes their mind and says, you know what, I don't want to sell anymore. I'm breaching. I am breaching. I'm out of here. I'm not selling it, period. Well, you would explain to them, well, the buyer could sue you for specific performance. We'll learn that later. They can sue you for recovering all of the money they've spent on inspections and the whole process and the due diligence and the earnest money and blah, blah, blah. And oh, by the way, you owe me too. You, the listing agent, could sue them. You could tell them, look, I've already done what I was supposed to do. I produced a ready, willing, and able buyer. We didn't get to closing because you're breaching first. But they're a cash buyer, so the able thing is there. They're ready and willing. They brought the offer. It got accepted. They're able also. I want my money. Breach all you want. Get sued by the buyer, but I'm coming after you too for my commission. Now, is it a business decision you want to make that your firm wants you to make to start suing your clients? Maybe not. But I'm just talking about the laws and the rules and what could you do. So, point is, have we earned it? When we've produced a ready, willing, and able buyer. When do we get paid the money we earned? Not till closing. Testable. It's a little harder to prove the able thing if the buyer is using financing. Where in the process did the seller go crazy and breach and try to walk away from the deal after we have a clear to close letter, as Rob mentions here, or some sort of a loan approval? Then yes, probably able. You probably, as the broker, have grounds to add your demand for commission into the mix. We will not have class on Monday. We do have class next Wednesday. So have a great week. Just work on this 7 and 8. We're going to cover the rest of 7 and get on into 8. A lot of it is crossover. Stuff we've learned in 7 does carry over, so we're not going to have to spend what the syllabus necessarily says because we do cover a lot of it in both chapters. So hang in there, and what comes next is in order, 9 and 10, so just keep on cranking it through. Again, skim the chapter at first, kind of get a feel for it. Then go back through and read it with the syllabus in hand and mark it up and turn both of those documents into a study review guide for yourself later. Don't forget that. And definitely read that comment section, pages 4 through 7, between now and next week, because that should be internalized. That applies to this material as well as your state part of the exam. Besides that, have a great weekend. Have a great week. Was it Labor Day? And we'll see you guys next week.
Neal, when you're mentioning, when you mention like 437 page, that's not a big book, right?
That's in the PDF called the License Law and Commission Rules comment section. It looks like this. Oops, that's way zoomed out. Okay.
So that's not the real estate licensing in North Carolina book.
So that's a little different. That's called the Relink book. Let me show you the difference here. So this is what is going to have your willful and negligent omission and all that good stuff in it. This comment section, you'll notice some little mentions like 93A-1.
Right.
If you see that, that means a license law item. If you see another one that's called, you might see something that says, here we go, Rule 502. That is a commission rule item. So if you see a 93A, that's going to show up in this other PDF called License Law 93A.
Is this the one that you had sent me?
Yeah, all of these are in the Google Drive. And we also I don't think we sent you this in the initial email, but all of that stuff is in that Google Drive you can get to through your Notion software.
I know I was out for a week. Literally
I know. Yeah.
I'll have to pull that back up.
The 58A is the real estate commission rules, and that's this other document. So it's all those three things together. The comment section is referring back to the license law, the 93A stuff, and the commission rules stuff, the 58 stuff.
I know I signed up in that Notion. That's on the phone, right?
Say again?
You could pull that through the cell phone Notion.
These documents?
I just know Notion as the app.
Oh, Notion. Yeah, you can access it through your phone or a laptop.
Because I think that's what I did when I was gone. We spoke about it.
Right.
But
I know I invited you. go ahead and pull up Notion and just put a comment in the comments section, not this comment section, but the Notion where people have made remarks at some point, so I'll know that it's working right for you. So open Notion at some point. You don't have to do it right now, and just type in something like here or working or whatever, just to make sure it is working. Because when you make a comment in Notion, it notifies me. That's how I know to go look and answer your question. Did you have something, Shane? Or are you just kind of listening along? I don't want to make you wait.
All right, I just had to get back to the screen. I was just going to ask if there's going to be a study session tomorrow.
Oh, yes, we still do. I should have reminded everybody. I'll put that in Notion. We're still having that. You bet. Yep. Tomorrow from 11 to 12 is the commitment. We might
Also noticed
we might go
go
longer.
comments. The end of chapter 7, the questions, you said number 15 was supposed to be C.
Yes.
I think it was labeled correctly as A in the book.
Right.
I just want to double check, make sure that was.
If you have a second, hang in there and let me look at it one more time just to be sure. Are you okay, Rob? Did you have anything else? Oh, yeah. I wanted to look it on the actual textbook anyway. I was looking it up on the online version, but I'm going to look it up on this version. So that was, I think, page 189. Yeah. And with 15.
Yes, sir.
Let's see here. All right, let's see here. Sally Smith and Bob broker are dual. Bob presents an offer to Sally. So the same firm. She presents a counter offer from the seller to Bob. He tells the buyer. At 11:30, the buyer accepts the counter offer in his presence. That's important. It's in his presence. So the communication has happened right then because he saw it happen. If they accepted it, if they signed it and he wasn't around, and then they had to call him to tell him they signed it, that's a little different. Meanwhile, at 11:45 on the same day, the seller gets a better offer, which he wants to accept, and tells Sally to withdraw the counter offer. Sally immediately communicates to Bob before he can tell her of the acceptance. Problem is, it's dual agency. They're working for them both. They can't show partiality to either side. If this were not dual agency, the answer would be different, because communication would happen when Bob told Sally that it was signed. But in this case, Bob is basically the same thing as Sally because they're both dual agents. So
I chose the answer C, and that's the one you said was correct.
Yes.
I wasn't really sure. I was actually half guessing.
Yes.
But the back of the book said it was actually answer A, so I just want to make sure everything lines up.
Yeah, A would be the right answer if it were a regular sale that's not dual agency. Okay. Because when the seller, when the buyer signed the counter in front of Bob, that was the same thing as Sally seeing it too because of the dual agency. In a regular transaction, not dual agency, that would not be good enough because it's not just acceptance, it's communicating that acceptance that determines whether you're under contract or not. So acceptance, the communication of the acceptance wouldn't have happened in a normal transaction, non-dual agency, until Bob told Sally that it had been signed. Sally doesn't even have to have it in her possession yet. Yeah. As long as she was told that the buyer side signed it, Bob told her so, that's good enough. He'll follow up and send it to her as proof, but the communication is that important to this mix. But do you see the difference though? Why A versus C because of dual agency? It's confusing, I know, but
it turned out I got it right according to you, but I was kind of half guessing.
Yeah.
I wasn't sure.
Yeah. As is often the case.
The other thing that was in my mind on it, dual agency versus whatever that subset is, I forget. It's another
designated.
Yeah, designated agents. I didn't know if there was like a difference that mattered. Those
It-
two.
It would. Designated is like you're back to two separate companies again. With designated dual agency, Bob is completely loyal to his client, the buyer, and Sally is completely loyal to her seller. But they're not designated. They're only dual, which means that they are kind of almost like on the same team because they neither one of them can tell the seller the most the buyer might be willing to pay if they knew. Neither one can tell the buyer the lowest the seller might be willing to take. They can't give either party, buyer or seller, an advantage over the other. Basically, they're pointless, kind of. It's like, well, what are you here for? They're not pointless. They provide documents and stuff, but they are just mediators. They're not like full fiduciary agents. Out of that old car stuff, the loyalty is gone when it's dual agency because they can't prioritize. What if Bob, this is the case where there's two agents that are acting as dual agents, but let's just say there's no Sally, there's only Bob. He's in the middle of both buyer and seller as the dual agent. Well, it was the seller who hired him first, right? The buyer came along later. Maybe that seller knew him from high school or somehow thinks, well, I got to you first. You owe me more than you owe them. He would have to correct them and say, I can appreciate that we go way back. However, I'm a dual agent. I can't give you an advantage over them because I'm a dual agent, because you agreed to let me be that. They don't have to agree to let him do it either, by the way.
I think the thing that maybe caused me a little bit of confusion was even though this question was set up as dual agency only and not designated agency, when I think of dual agency, in my mind, I put it as one sub-agent that's working on behalf of my two sub-agents working as a dual, as somehow some version of dual agency.
Right. Well, sub-agents are off the table in this one because both Sally and Bob are dual. We will finish chapter 7 the next time we get together for our current class that this recording supports. That's going to be 1 week from today, which will be not on Monday because that's Labor Day, but it will be the 7th, September 7th. And I'll see you then. Otherwise, definitely finish 7 and 8. Keep reading 7, 8, and move on into 9 and 10. Be ready for that. And then definitely stay on top of the comments section. Don't leave that out. Make sure you're reading. Hopefully you've read through that whole comment section at least twice by now, because you should be studying that along the way, right? Oh, and we will definitely have our study group session tomorrow from 11 to 12, at least 11 to 12 tomorrow, Thursday, September 1st, between 11 and 12. I'll remind you in Notion. Other than that, have a great day.